Chaos discovered two things at exactly the same moment. First, the human bladder has limits. Second, sometimes dignity simply has to take a lunch break. He stood at the far end of the Sunrise Suds car wash, holding a pressure hose in one hand and staring at the puddle forming around his sneakers like a philosopher observing the slow collapse of civilization. Unavoidable. Chaos sighed. Well, he muttered, glancing down at his soaked jeans, this is going to be one of those days. The delivery van waiting in the wash bay idled impatiently. A ridiculous plastic hula girl on the dashboard wagged her hips cheerfully, apparently delighted by the entire situation. One of the other workers leaned against the wall, jingling a chain wallet and smirking. Chaos shrugged. 19. Sleep schedule of a raccoon. Expect. The co-worker laughed in a way that wasn't particularly friendly. Kid like you ought to be down at the Mexican border washing trucks or something. Chaos ignored him. He had learned something recently about scoundrels. They tended to choke on their own stupidity eventually. Life had a way of applying a slow chokehold to people who mistook cruelty for personality. He sprayed down the van. Soap foam slid across the windshield like a tiny high tide rolling in. Somewhere rock song drifted through the air. The kind of music that made you imagine long highways, cheap beer, and a sunset that didn't care about your problems. Chaos wiped his hands and stared toward the road. He thought about baby Jermaine, about how the kid's tiny big toe curled around Chaos's pinky finger when he held him, about the little rise and fall of the baby's navel when he breathed. Life had gotten weird lately. Not teenage father weird, more like purgatory with extra steps weird. Which brings us to Dorothea. Across town, Dorothea sat at her kitchen table examining a very strange object. A dead rabbit. It had been left on her doorstep sometime before sunrise. Beside it lay a small card written in looping ink. The message read, "The path through shadows is also the path to light." Dorothea squinted at it. Well, she said calmly to Gumbo, who was making coffee, that's troubling yet oddly inspirational. Gumbo leaned over. White magic? Could be a lunatic with a poetry hobby. Gumbo shrugged. Same thing sometimes. Baby Jermaine burbled happily in his crib, completely unconcerned with mystical rabbit deliveries. At the malt shop, Cora wiped down the counter while Erica restocked the syrup dispensers. The tension between them hung in the air like stale perfume. Cora finally broke the silence. "We still doing the wedding thing?" Cora said. "Sean insists the priest already booked the date. The same priest who got drunk during Mass last week." "That's the one," Erica snorted. "Romantic." The neon sign outside flickered on as dusk crept across the feeder road. A Tiffany lamp glowed warmly above the pie case. Cora braided her hair into a tight French braid and sighed. "I just hope nothing weird happens before the ceremony." Erica stared at her. Meanwhile, at the call center, Clotilde and Youngblood shared a quiet moment during their break. Clotilde sipped from a tumbler of red wine she kept disguised in a coffee mug. Youngblood studied a motivational poster that read, "You are your own best motivational speaker." He sighed. "That sign makes me want to become a stand-up comic instead." Clotilde patted his shoulder. "Wonderful. You're just saying that because I helped fix your Jaguar on blocks in the driveway? You saved my life?" "Sure, I just changed a tire." "Same difference." At the blind school, the new teacher had arrived that morning, Mr. Babish. He seemed perfectly normal, soft-spoken. He quoted ancient Rome, referenced Sacagawea, and once explained the origins of Sanskrit during a geography lesson by Something about the man's smile felt. After class ended, Loon lingered in the hallway. Babish remained inside the classroom alone. The lights were dim. Loon leaned closer to the cracked door. Inside, Mr. Babish placed his hands flat on the desk. Then something extraordinary happened. His skin rippled. His shoulders folded inward like collapsing paper. His height shrank. Clothes slid awkwardly as his body transfigured itself. Within seconds, Mr. Babish was gone. In his place stood a young girl. She blinked slowly, flexing her hands like someone adjusting to gravity. Loon's stomach dropped. The girl whispered softly to herself, "Much better." Loon stepped backward in shock. His foot bumped a locker. The girl's head snapped toward the door. Back at the car wash, Chaos finally finished his shift. He climbed into the old sedan Dorothea had loaned him. The dashboard held 3 objects. A good luck charm shaped like a tiny horseshoe. A wrinkled CD single of I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. And, for reasons no one remembered, a plastic bottle of urine someone had left there months ago. Chaos sighed. He tossed the bottle into the trash. Today, he said to himself, I deserve French bread, a shower, and maybe an exorcism. Back at Dorothea's house, Ralph the parrot cleared his throat dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, Ralph announced, today I shall deliver a brief monologue regarding the career of Margaret Hamilton, celebrated 1930s actress and undisputed queen of theatrical menace. Gumbo groaned. Here we go. Ralph puffed his feathers. Born in 1902, the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz. A role defined by green skin, cackling laughter, and professional-grade broomstick piloting. Hollywood rarely rewarded women with such delicious villainy. Frankly, I admire the hustle. He paused thoughtfully. Also, her cheekbones were excellent. Night fell across the town. A quiet carnival breeze rustled the leaves. The kind of wind that smells faintly of funnel cakes and electrical wires. And then, the tree. At first, it looked like moss. Then, unmistakably, every oak, maple, and sycamore sprouted long strands that spilled down their trunks like strange botanical wigs. Street lights flickered. Branches rustled. By midnight, the Dorothea stared out her window. Well, she said calmly, that's new. Baby Jermaine giggled in his sleep. And, a young girl who had once been Mr. Babish watched the trees with quiet satisfaction. The experiment, it seemed, was far from finished.
Chapter 2. The Mirror That Never Blinks. Morning in this town did not so much arrive as it hovered high above things for a while, deciding whether it was worth the trouble.
The hair growing on the trees had not gone away.
Every maple, oak, and sycamore stood there like a lineup of slightly embarrassed giants wearing wigs they hadn't agreed to purchase.
Chaos walked past them on his way to the car wash.
He stared up.
All right, he muttered. That's officially past the point where I can pretend everything's normal.
A breeze moved through the branches. The hair swayed.
For a moment, it almost looked like the trees were dancing. Not gracefully. More like a confused shotgun ballet performed by woodland creatures who had read one too many philosophy books. Chaos rubbed his eyes. Single father, he reminded himself.
Keep it together.
Town Cora was opening the malt shop. The neon sign buzzed softly. A few discarded napkins from the night before still lay on the counter beside the register. Cora wiped them up and sighed. She loved the place, but the dark red wallpaper behind the pie case gave the room a slightly scandalous vibe like the dining room of a turn-of-the-century brothel that had decided to go respectable and serve milkshakes. Erica hadn't arrived yet, which meant Cora was alone.
Which meant she made the mistake.
She opened Erica's locker. Snooping. Not exactly.
More like curiosity with poor impulse control.
Inside were normal things. A hairbrush. A pack of gum. A Hotmail printout of an old email chain. Something strange.
A thin black notebook.
Cora hesitated.
Inside were sketches.
Symbols. References to something called the Akashic Records scribbled beside strange diagrams of tunnels.
One page showed a rough drawing of the gray courtyard in the middle of the convent. Another page listed names. Dorothea,
Gumbo, Tild,
Teos. At the bottom of the page, written in small, neat letters.
Hidden helpers active. Cora felt her stomach drop. What the hell? Steps outside.
Cora slammed the notebook shut and shoved it back into the locker. Erica walked in moments later, carrying a box of pastry supplies and wearing a heavy smile.
Morning, Cora said carefully. They looked at each other.
2 women, both pretending not to notice the secrets humming in the room.
Meanwhile,
inside the convent grounds, Dorothea and Gumbo walked through the stone path toward the courtyard. The winding staircase inside the old building creaked beneath their feet.
sunlight filtered down through tall skylights. Somewhere in the walls, an ancient dumbwaiter clanked like a mechanical ghost delivering sandwiches to the past. You ever get the feeling we're living inside a puzzle? Dorothea shrugged. Every day since the slime showed up.
They stepped into the gray courtyard.
3 trees stood there.
Each one now covered in long strands of hair. A nun-watering flower stared at them with the distant calm of someone who had simply decided not to question anything anymore.
Gumbo whispered.
All right.
Dorothea nodded. Sane.
Then the mirror began to glow.
Deep inside the convent was a secret room. Dorothea opened the door quietly. The mirror hung there like a silent witness.
The glass shimmered.
Letters appeared slowly across the surface. Dorothea read them aloud. Do you wear the wolf in sheep's clothing? More words appeared. False flag events are unfolding. Dorothea frowned.
Sounds political.
Then the message changed.
A name appeared.
Erica.
Dorothea's breath caught. Another line followed. She is not what she appears. The mirror went dark. The blind school. Loon was still shaken from what he had seen the night before. He walked down the hallway slowly. From inside the classroom, he heard Mr. Babish speaking softly.
The student laughed.
Everything sounded normal. Loon peeked through the door. Mr. Babish stood at the desk, smiling warmly. His eyes gleamed with unsettling calm. Loon whispered to himself, "That man's got more layers in the pyramids."
The call center. Tild and Youngblood sat at their desks answering customer complaints about internet outages. Youngblood leaned closer.
You ever hear of the Golden Mile? Tild nodded. Long story. Bad neighborhood. Youngblood shrugged. I had a dream last night about someone rising on the Golden Mile with temporary wings. Tild blinked.
Specific.
Youngblood nodded slowly.
Also, the trees had hair?
Tild rubbed her temples.
Wonderful.
Back at the malt shop, Erica finally stepped into the kitchen. Cora watched her carefully now. Not fearfully. Just aware. Erica hummed while slicing buttermilk pie.
You know, she said casually, in some places they put butter on your nose on your birthday.
Cora blinked. It's a tradition. Erica smiled. Celebration custom.
She slid a slice of pie onto a plate.
Cora noticed something strange in Erica's eyes. So,
a flicker of fascination. As if she were observing the room the way a scientist observes lab mice.
That night, Teos sat on the porch holding baby Germaine. The baby babbled happily. Teos sighed.
Shit, I swear the universe is turning into a Roadrunner cartoon.
Germaine gurgled. From somewhere in the yard came a strange crunching sound.
Teos, look down!
The talking kidney stone from months earlier lay on the porch step.
It rolled slightly.
Cleared its throat. Then spoke. Gentlemen, it rasped. Things were about to get worse.
Teos stared.
Germaine giggled. And somewhere far away, Mr. Babish stood alone in the dark woods,
watching the hair-covered trees sway.
His body flickered briefly between shapes. Girl, something else entirely. And he whispered softly,
"The sentience is beginning."
The wind rustled the hairy branches above him like an audience applauding a very strange play.
Chapter 3. The sound electricity makes when it chooses someone. Clotilde discovered something humiliating but oddly philosophical about the human body. It refuses to wait for dignity. She stood in the checkout lane of the grocery store, staring calmly at the growing warmth spreading through her slacks. The automatic doors sighed open and shut nearby like mechanical lungs. A child bounced past on a pogo stick. Clotilde sighed. Well, she murmured to herself, this is happening. The young cashier looked horrified. Clotilde raised a finger. Don't panic. At my age, it's either this or small morning injections of amphetamines to stay upright, and frankly, I've already tried those. The cashier blinked. Clotilde leaned forward conspiratorially. You should see the research rabbit hole that leads you down. She paid for her groceries with perfect calm while her bladder continued its quiet rebellion. The child with the pogo stick bounced out the door. Clotilde shook her head. Life is mysterious. At the malt shop, Erica had just plugged in the milkshake mixer. The chrome machine hummed. Cora wiped down the counter beneath the old brazen glass decor scheme that had made the place look halfway between a soda fountain and a small-town museum exhibit curated by someone with a sweet tooth. Erica glanced toward the kitchen. You still mad about the locker thing? Cora stiffened.
What locker thing?
Erica gave her a heavy smile. Relax. Cora tried to change the subject. Want some jambalaya? Gumbo brought leftovers. Erica turned toward the mixer.
Maybe later.
The machine sparked. Once. Twice. Then the electricity hit. Erica jerked violently. Her body seized like a puppet, yanked by invisible strings. A scream tore from her throat. Cora froze. The lights flickered. Then Erica collapsed to the floor. The mixer kept spinning. Milkshake foam slowly overflowed down the metal cup, like something obscene and ordinary at the same time. Cora whispered,
Oh, God.
2 hours later, the place was full of detectives. Yellow tape. Flash photography. The floor marked with a chalk outline. One of the detectives knelt beside the outlet. Faulty wiring? His partner asked.
Maybe.
He glanced at Erica's body being wheeled away. Maybe not. The older detective sighed. I've been doing this 20 years, and this town still gives me the creeps. The younger one nodded toward Cora.
She did it.
Doubt it. Cora sat in the booth, staring into a glass of water. Sul. Shattered. The older detective rubbed his jaw. She looks like someone just lost a war. Outside the malt shop, Chaos arrived carrying baby Jermaine. Dorothea met him by the door. She's gone, Dorothea said softly. Chaos exhaled slowly. The wind moved through the hair-covered trees. A blackbird landed on the sign above them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Gumbo muttered,
Well...
That escalated. Chaos shook his head.
Erica always had vampire-adjacent behavior, but I didn't think she'd go out like that. Dorothea elbowed him. Too soon. Chaos sighed.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the police impounded Erica's car. A faded 1989 Cadillac DeVille sat crooked in the parking lot behind the station. Inside the glove compartment, they found something strange. Not drugs. Not weapons. A stack of papers. Ancient diagrams. Maps of tunnels beneath town. And one note. Written in Erica's neat handwriting. What you lose you can also find.
Across town.
Loon sat strapped to a chair in Graceville Psychiatric Hospital. A nurse watched him carefully. You need to stay calm. Loon laughed. I watched my teacher turn into a 12-year-old girl. The nurse nodded politely.
That must have been frightening.
Loon leaned forward. I'm not crazy. The doctor scribbled notes. Possible heresy fixation, he muttered. Loon groaned. You people are unbelievable.
Back at the police station.
Clotilde stormed inside. Youngblood followed nervously. We demand to see Loon, she told the receptionist.
You can't.
Clotilde leaned closer. My nephew is not insane. The receptionist looked uncomfortable. Youngblood whispered. She thinks all of us are a sour-smelling bunch. Clotilde slapped the counter. This is a shouting match waiting to happen. Later that evening, Chaos drove home along a quiet red clay road. A horse ran alongside the car for a moment, like a ghostly companion. Baby Germaine slept peacefully. Chaos thought about Erica, about the strange notebook, about the message in the mirror. He whispered to the dark road ahead. Things are starting to connect. Inside the convent, Dorothea stared at the mirror again. Words slowly appeared. The first piece has fallen. Dorothea swallowed. What piece? The mirror changed. Another line appeared. The second is locked away, she whispered. Loon. Then the final message appeared. The third is watching. Dorothea turned toward the window.
Outside.
The trees swayed, their strange hair whispering in the wind like an audience sharing secrets. And far away, on a glass floor observation deck above the old tunnels beneath town, Mr. Babish stood smiling quietly. His reflection shimmered in the glass.
Man.
Girl.
Man again.
He whispered softly to himself. Phase 3. The wind rustled the hairy branches like applause for a performance no one understood yet.
Chapter 4. The alley that solved one problem and created another. Chaos discovered something else about the human body that morning. The bladder is a traitor. He stood beside the sink in Dorothea's kitchen holding baby Germaine and staring at the spreading warmth in his jeans with the kind of calm curiosity usually reserved for astronomy. Well, he said quietly, this is the second time this week. Germaine giggled. Chaos shrugged. Look, kids, sometimes the body decides it's a fire drill and everyone evacuates immediately. Dorothea entered the room, saw the situation and sighed. Chaos nodded. Gumbo peeked in. You two are a walking medical pamphlet. The news arrived an hour later. And it arrived like a dropped piano. Loon had been found dead behind the malt shop, in the same narrow alley where too many strange things had already happened. 2 gunshot wounds. No witnesses. Just the flicker of the neon sign and the smell of old grease. The police tape fluttered in the morning wind like a sad little parade banner. Clotilde stood at the scene, staring at the alley. She did not cry. Youngblood hovered beside her, unsure what to say. A raccoon darted past the trash cans, carrying a half-melted popsicle like a bandit fleeing the scene of a sugar crime. Clotilde whispered quietly, "First, Erica." Youngblood nodded slowly. This town's starting to feel like Noah's Ark after the storm. Clotilde blinked. That makes absolutely no sense. Youngblood shrugged. "I'm grieving." Chaos arrived with Dorothea and Gumbo. The police were already examining the body. One detective muttered while checking the vital signs, which were obviously absent. Gunshots. The other detective scratched his chin. Same weird town. He kicked a loose piece of chalk that had once marked Erica's outline. Either this place has terrible luck or somebody's cleaning house. Chaos looked down. A line of spilled rosary beads. They had rolled across the pavement in such a way that they spelled a word. Dorothea leaned closer. "Janet?" Chaos frowned. Inside the convent garden behind the tool shed that nobody likes to talk about, something stirred beneath the soil. Then 2 eyes. Then an entire slime troll covered in mossy green goo. The troll wiped dirt from its face and sighed. Finally, the creature brushed off its little jacket and introduced itself politely. "My name is Janet." Janet looked around. Hairy trees swaying. Police sirens in the distance. This town has gotten weird since the last time I checked in. At the police station. Clotilde finally lost her composure. She shouted, Youngblood tried to calm her. She slammed her fist on the desk.
My nephew was not insane.
The detective nodded gently. We're looking into everything. Clotilde glared. Meanwhile, deep beneath the convent, Dorothea and Chaos descended a narrow stairway into the tunnels. The walls smelled like damp stone and forgotten secrets. A small cuckoo clock someone had abandoned decades ago ticked faintly on the wall. Why is that down here? Chaos whispered. Dorothea shrugged. Nothing in this town makes sense. They turned a corner. Standing calmly in the tunnel was Mr. Babish. The girl. Both. Her body flickered between forms like a television with bad reception. Girl. Chaos pointed. That's extremely unsettling. The figure sighed. Deserve an explanation. Dorothea crossed her arms. The being spoke quietly. Chaos nodded. Great start. I am a sentient transfiguration construct designed decades ago to monitor this town's evolutionary experiment. Chaos blinked. The being gestured toward the tunnels, the transformations, the hair on the trees, all part of a dormant biological system. Dorothea frowned. Why kill Loon? I did not. Then who? The being hesitated, then answered quietly. The experiment has begun producing stragglers. Chaos rubbed his temples. Define stragglers. Individuals who mutate beyond the design parameters. Loon was one of them? The being nodded slowly. He was becoming dangerous, Dorothea whispered. So someone eliminated him. Chaos looked up at the ceiling. Fantastic. Back above ground. Ralph the parrot had climbed onto the jukebox at the malt shop. The crowd of confused townspeople stared while he delivered a dramatic monologue. Ladies and gentlemen, Ralph announced, I have reached an important life decision. Chaos sighed. Here we go. I would like to commission a Reba McEntire skin suit. The room went silent. Ralph continued enthusiastically. Think about it. The country music gravitas. The ability to stride confidently across the stage of life, singing about heartbreak while wearing excellent boots. Dorothea rubbed her temples. I hate this town. The sun began to set. A few kids rode a BMX dirt bike down the deserted back road near the swamp. Kites floated above the trees. Someone at the flea market down the road was selling boxes of raisin bran, French bread, and caramel corn under flickering neon signs coloured chartreuse, beige and dark brown plaid. Life continued, as it always does. But one mystery had finally been solved. Dorothea stood outside the convent watching the hair-covered trees sway. So Babish isn't human, Chaos said. Good to know. But there's a bigger problem now. The stragglers. Dorothea looked toward the dark road leading out of town. If Loon was one, Chaos finished the thought quietly. How many others are there? Behind them, in the shadows of the tool shed, Janet, the helpful slime troll, waved politely. Neither of them noticed. Yet me. Chapter 5. The troll, the Eskimo, and the sound of something awakening. Youngblood learned something unfortunate about the human digestive system while standing on the sidewalk outside the Family Dollar store. It had absolutely no respect for timing. He stood frozen beside a display of discount laundry detergent while a slow, undeniable catastrophe unfolded in his trousers. Completely unavoidable. Youngblood blinked calmly. Well, he said to the old woman beside him, this is happening. The woman clutched a bag containing a jar of figs, a loaf of bread dusted with cinnamon, and a pack of TP. She stared at him. At least it's not contagious. He waddled away with dignity, which is the only form of dignity available when dignity itself has clearly abandoned the situation. Behind the convent's infamous tool shed that nobody likes to talk about, Janet the slime troll was explaining things. Janet was about 2 feet tall, slightly gelatinous, and Chaos crouched in front of her. "All right," he said carefully, "so you're a troll." "Helpful troll," Janet corrected politely. Dorothea rubbed her temples. Janet nodded. "Technically, I'm a go-adaptive subterranean guide organism, but troll is easier." Gumbo leaned against the wall. "So what exactly do you help with?" Janet pointed toward the trees. Chaos blinked. "That sounds bad." Janet shrugged. "Depends on your definition of bad." Across town, a man stepped out of a battered pickup truck at the gas station that sells big blue sodas and questionable sandwiches. He was tall, quiet, wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild weather. His name was ALMANAC. He had driven down from the far north after following a trail of strange reports, hair-covered trees, mutations. The sort of things that get mentioned in old stories whispered in igloos during long winters. He stepped inside the station. The clerk looked up. Passing through, Nanak smiled politely. "Not exactly." The clerk nodded toward the cooler. "We got Asian sandwiches in the back if you're hungry." Nanak bought one and stepped outside again. He watched the strange town carefully. Then he muttered softly in his own language. At the barber school downtown, a dozen trainees were practicing haircuts on mannequins. Outside the window, the trees swayed slowly, covered in hair. One student blinked. "Is that normal?" Instructor sighed. Back at the convent tunnels, Dorothea held up the strange stone tablet Janet had just uncovered. Symbols covered it. Janet pointed. Chaos squinted. "What does it say?" Janet read aloud carefully. "When the slime awakens, the watchers return." Gumbo frowned. "That's ominous." Dorothea flipped the tablet over. "Moo!" A quote from scripture. Janet translated, "The chapter in the Bible that mentions Dan." "You mean Dan shall be a serpent, by the way?" Janet nodded. Chaos groaned. "Of course, the apocalypse has footnotes." Inside the mold shop, Ralph the parrot had climbed onto the jukebox again. A crowd of confused customers watched while he cleared his throat dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ralph announced, "today I will discuss footwear of the 1920s. Chaos whispered to Dorothea, "This should be illegal." Ralph began pacing. The Oxford shoe dominated men's fashion sleek, dignified, perfect for dancing the Charleston or committing mild tax fraud. He spread his wings. Women favored T-strap heels, elegant creations that allowed maximum ankle visibility while maintaining structural integrity during Jazz Age enthusiasm. He leaned closer to the audience. And let us not forget the humble canvas tennis shoe, ancestor of modern rebellion. The room sat in stunned silence. Ralph nodded proudly. "You're welcome." Later that night, something terrifying and something astounding. The disturbing thing, at the laundromat, a man discovered a loaded syringe hidden in the lint trap of a washing machine. The terrifying thing, the syringe was filled with glowing green slime. The hilarious thing, Janet accidentally ate it. The astounding thing, Chaos stared. "You just drank experimental mutation fluid?" Janet shrugged. "I've had worse." Nanak walked slowly down the dark street. He paused near the old fire station. The wind rustled the hairy trees. He whispered a small prayer of Eskimo etiquette, a traditional request for balance between humans and the strange forces of nature. Then he saw it, in the reflection of a storefront window, Mr. Babish, or the girl, watching him. They locked eyes. Nanak smiled calmly. "So, you are one of the watchers?" The shapeshifter tilted its head. "You know what we are?" Nanak nodded. "My people remember things." Chaos walked home carrying baby Jermaine. He passed the sidewalk, the laundromat, the family dollar store, and the strange little town that kept getting stranger. Jermaine yawned. Chaos looked down at him. "Kid," he said gently, "I have a feeling we're standing in the middle of something enormous." Jermaine gurgled happily. Behind them, the trees whispered in the wind, and deep beneath the town, The slime stirred, as if the earth itself were preparing for something. Something with very strong opinions about footwear. Chapter 6. The funeral without a body. The day of Loon's funeral began with pandemonium, which is rarely how funerals prefer to introduce themselves. A marching band practicing for the upcoming St. Patrick's Day parade route had mistakenly started their rehearsal 1 block away from the church. Trumpets blared. Drums thundered. Someone played the wrong song 3 times in a row. Clotilde sat in the front pew, gripping a leather belt she had twisted into a knot in her hands. Could they not practice literally anywhere else? She whispered. Youngblood leaned close. I asked them to move. They told me the permit was older than the church. You know what? Fine. Let the man have a trumpet funeral. Meanwhile, 2 detectives stood outside the malt shop studying Erica's death again. Detective Harper flipped open a worn notebook. His partner nodded. Cause of death electrocution. But here's the problem. The partner frowned. So what killed her? Harper pointed to a photo. A thin burn mark across Erica's palm. Harper leaned back against the car. The younger detective shook his head. This town gives me the same feeling I got working a case near the New Orleans Police Department years ago. That everybody knows something and nobody wants to say it out loud. At the call center, something new had happened. Nanook, the quiet Eskimo who had arrived days earlier, was now sitting beside Youngblood wearing a headset and learning the strange art of emergency dispatch call transfers. Youngblood showed him the controls. You push this button when someone's complaining about their internet. Nanook nodded calmly. And that one routes the call to someone else who cares. Nanook smiled. This job reminds me of winter. Long stretches of silence interrupted by panic. Back at the funeral, the church was packed. Dorothea sat beside Chaos, who was rocking baby Jermaine gently. The baby was chewing on a piece of paper that had once been the funeral program. Chaos whispered, "Kid's already editing the service." Dorothea managed a tired smile. The priest cleared his throat. "We gather today to remember Lou." Clotilde closed her eyes. A childhood memory of an ant farm drifted through her mind loon at age 7, staring fascinated at the tiny tunnels. "Look, Aunt Clotilde," he had said. "They're building a city." She felt tears forming. At the back of the church, Gumbo leaned against a pillar, curiously wondering why the coffin looked slightly crooked. Something about it felt wrong. The service ended. People stood. The casket was rolled toward the hearse. Clotilde walked beside it silently. They arrived at the cemetery. The gravediggers lowered the coffin. The lid opened, and the entire gathering gasped. The casket was empty. Then absolute panic. Clotilde stepped back. "That's not funny." The priest stared into the coffin. Chaos whispered, "That's new." Dorothea frowned.
No, it's not.
Everyone turned toward her.
This before.
Gumbo asked. Dorothea nodded slowly. When experiments go wrong, sometimes the subject disappears. Clotilde looked like she might faint. Back at the convent tool shed, Janet the slime troll stood beside a false wall hidden behind stacks of gardening equipment. She pushed it open. Behind it, a secret safe room. Old monitors flickered, maps of the town, a dusty diary. Subject loom progressing toward stage 4 mutation. Chaos frowned. What's stage 4? Janet flipped another page. Spontaneous disappearance. That's extremely unhelpful. At the call center later that evening, Youngblood and Nanook were eating slices of cantaloupe from a plastic container. Youngblood leaned back in his chair. You know what's weird? Sometimes when people wake up from surgery, they start speaking in a foreign language. Nanook nodded thoughtfully. The brain remembers things in strange ways. Do you ever get the feeling this whole town is remembering something? Nanook smiled quietly. Across town, behind the convent tool shed, someone was doing something unspeakable. the kind of act that would never appear in official records. The wind carried faint sounds across the field. Janet paused. That's... Chaos groaned. I don't want to know. Janet nodded. Wise choice. A massive 18-wheeler thundered down the highway near the swamp. Inside its trailer, a metal container rattled violently. Something inside pounded the walls. The driver glanced nervously in the mirror. The container split open. A figure crawled out slowly, covered in slime, eyes glowing faintly. And something else entirely now, he whispered softly to the empty trailer. Time to go home. The truck continued down the dark road while the town slept, unaware that the funeral they had just held was for someone who had already begun walking again. Chapter 7. The state of things. The night began quietly. Almost suspiciously quiet. Outside the call center. Youngblood leaned back in his chair, wearing his dispatch headset, watching the computer screen glow softly in the dim room. Nanak sat across from him, calmly organizing paperwork. Something about the man had always seemed peaceful, grounded. But tonight, Youngblood was curiously wondering something. He had noticed details, little ones. The kind that start as tiny pebbles in the shoe of your mind. Nanak had needle marks on his forearm. Youngblood had seen them when Nanak rolled up his sleeve. And there was something else. Earlier that day, Nanak had quoted a line from the State of the Union address. Word for word. Which was impressive. Because when Youngblood had asked him how long he had lived in the United States, Nanak had paused too long before answering. Youngblood leaned back. So, you ever been to the state capital? Nanak looked up slowly. You ask. Youngblood shrugged. Just making conversation. Nanak smiled politely. But it was the kind of smile that... lightness. At the convent, Dorothea, Gumbo, and Clotilde were descending the stairs toward the secret room. The hallway smelled like dust and old books.
Blackberries had somehow rolled down the steps from the kitchen above.
Clotilde kicked one aside. We're living inside a disaster zone. Dorothea nodded. The state of affairs has definitely deteriorated. Gumbo opened the door. The mirror flickered softly. A faint velvet rope barrier that Clotilde had insisted on installing stood in front of it like the entrance to a haunted nightclub. The glass shimmered. Letters began forming. Dorothea read aloud. Conception speaking, Clotilde gasped. The mirror continued. The watchers are failing. Gumbo frowned. What watchers? The one you trust is not what he seems. The mirror went dark. The room fell silent. Dorothea whispered. The trees had begun growing their hair faster, much faster. What had once been strange now looked alarming. Strands hung down across sidewalks, tangling into telephone wires. At the state championship football field, Players arriving for practice stared in disbelief as thick ropes of hair draped across the goalposts like something out of a nightmare. One teenager whispered, "This place is in a grave state." Another kid said, "At the call center."
Youngblood had pulled up Nanak's employee file.
The screen glowed. No birth record, no social security number, no previous employment, just a single line. Factory settings active.
Youngblood blinked.
He glanced up. Nanook was watching him, calm, still, too still. Youngblood felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're not really from Alaska, are you?" Nanook smiled faintly. Back in the town square, chaos was brewing. The enormous tree in front of City Hall had grown so much hair that it now looked like a giant tangled wig. People gathered beneath it. Someone No one laughed very hard. Chaos pushed a cart filled with canned goods, parsnips, and a single raffle ticket he had bought absent-mindedly near the register. Baby Jermaine sat in the cart chewing on a receipt. Chaos looked up at the hairy tree outside. This town's either entering a state of grace or a catatonic state. Jermaine drooled thoughtfully. Later that night, Dorothea stood outside the convent watching the trees. The hair now dragged across the sidewalks like living ropes. Some branches looked almost alive. Clotilde joined her.
What did the mirror mean?
Dorothea whispered. It said someone we trust isn't what he seems. Clotilde frowned. You mean Nanook? Dorothea shook her head slowly.
I don't know. At the call center, Youngblood confronted Nanook.
You've got needle marks. You have no records.
Youngblood swallowed.
Nanook leaned forward calmly. I am someone who came here to stop what is about to happen.
Youngblood's voice dropped.
And Nanook looked out the window at the hairy trees.
They are not just growing hair.
Youngblood felt a chill run through him.
Nanook answered softly.
They are waking up. Across town, a woman walking home beneath the trees suddenly froze. A strand of hair wrapped gently around her wrist.
Then another,
she whispered in terror. The hair tightened. The town was slowly being woven into something.
And somewhere deep beneath the convent,
Janet the slime troll whispered quietly to herself. This is very bad. She looked up toward the ceiling.
The forest is remembering.
Chapter 8.
Loose ends and lightning rods.
The morning began with Gumbo standing in line at the laundromat holding a jug of laundry detergent, contemplating the philosophical limits of human dignity. He had eaten 2 double cheeseburgers the night before. That had been a mistake. Now he stood quietly in the middle of the room while a slow biological catastrophe unfolded in his trousers.
Unavoidable.
Gumbo exhaled calmly.
Muttered, that's unfortunate.
A woman folding towels stared at him.
Gumbo shrugged.
I've worked a double shift 3 days in a row. The body eventually files a complaint. He waddled toward the door with remarkable grace. Life, he said cheerfully, is a free flow of experiences. At the convent secret room, Dorothea, Clotilde, Chaos, and Janet the slime troll were finally beginning to untangle some of the loose ends that had been strangling the story. Janet had spread several old documents across the table. A cracked fountain pen rested beside them. Dorothea leaned over the pages. So Erica was investigating the tunnels. Janet nodded. Clotilde frowned. And she died because Janet pointed to a diagram. Electrical containment system. Mixer. Janet nodded again. Erica accidentally triggered an old security circuit. Dorothea sighed slowly. So her death wasn't murder. Clotilde closed her eyes. Chaos rubbed his face. That's one mystery solved. Janet raised a finger. She slid another paper forward. It showed the mutation stages. Stage 2, Stage 3, Dorothea whispered. Janet nodded. He wasn't murdered either. He disappeared because his body completed transfiguration Stage 4. Chaos scratched his head. Clotilde sat back slowly. Chaos nodded. Dead nephew turning into a mutant is technically an improvement. Clotilde glared at him. Watch yourself. The town was adjusting to the hair-covered trees in the way small towns adjust to almost anything, with confusion and baked goods. Someone had hung cotton candy strands from the branches as a joke. Another person had tied a bow and arrow target to a trunk during a misguided attempt at recreational archery. A group of teenagers took selfies beside the hairy oak like it was the White House Christmas tree. Youngblood and Nanak sat at the call center eating lunch. Youngblood had a sandwich. Nanak had a bowl of Corny's cereal. Nanak nodded politely. I am unfamiliar with this cultural artifact. Youngblood pointed out the window. So what's the plan if the trees keep growing? Nanak answered calmly. There are no mountains here. At the church, Cora was sitting quietly with Dorothea discussing wedding plans. Cora held a stack of invitations. Dorothea raised an eyebrow. Even though you know you shouldn't? Cora sighed. It's symbolic. Dorothea nodded thoughtfully. They both laughed, for the first time in days. But the laughter didn't last long, because a new problem had just arrived. Edge of town. A truck carrying military equipment rolled slowly past the state line. Inside were crates of tactical gear, sensors, and the driver checked a clipboard. Here growing trees. Possible biological event. One of the scientists sighed. This place is a ramshackle lightning rod for weirdness. Another scientist adjusted his glasses. Orders from Washington. The White House wants answers. Back at the convent, Janet the slime troll looked up from the documents. That's bad. Chaos frowned. Janet pointed toward the horizon. Government scientists. Chaos nodded slowly. Janet sighed. They're going to try to shut the experiment down. Dorothea folded her arms. And that's a problem. Janet looked very serious. Because the system is already awake. Chaos leaned forward. And if they shut it down? Janet answered quietly. Everything connected to it dies. They all looked outside at the hairy trees, at the town, at the people walking beneath the strange branches. Dorothea whispered. So the government fixing this? Janet nodded. Chaos sighed deeply. Across the street, Gumbo was buying a fresh shirt after his laundromat incident. He glanced up at the trees swaying above the streetlights. Everybody calm down. Let's just handle this on the double. Behind him, the wind moved through the hair-covered branches like something breathing. And very much alive.
Chapter 9. 3 places where the world split open. The morning began with Youngblood walking to work, carrying a M.C. Donald's bag. Inside it, $30,000? He had found it on the sidewalk outside the call center at dawn, sitting there like a bizarre prize from a rigged carnival game. Youngblood stared at it for a long time. $30,000, he whispered. Then he shrugged. Well, first come, first served, I guess. He kept walking. The bag swung gently at his side. Unfortunately, that was when something disturbing happened. Halfway down the street, Youngblood felt a sudden tightening in his stomach. Then warmth. Then the slow, horrifying realization that he had once again betrayed by his own intestines. He stopped walking, looked down, sighed.
Okay, he said calmly.
Not ideal. A pigeon landed nearby and stared at him. Youngblood shrugged. Listen, pal, sometimes life is rancid rice, milk, and sorrow. He kept walking toward work, the bag of money swinging, the crisis continuing. The blind school. At the blind school, something extraordinary was unfolding. The students had gathered in the auditorium for a scheduled fire safety demonstration. A visiting instructor stood on stage holding a small torch lighter. Today we're going to discuss emergency preparedness. He flicked the lighter. The tiny flame danced. Behind him, the school's antique display case held a strange artifact. An old ceremonial Olympic torch donated decades earlier by a retired athlete. Suddenly, the torch ignited by itself. A tall golden flame erupted upward like a signal to the sky. The students gasped. One boy whispered, "I can feel the heat," another student muttered. "This isn't part of the lesson." The flame burned brighter and brighter. Then a voice echoed through the auditorium loudspeaker. Shelter in place. No one knew where the voice came from, but the flame kept burning, like a beacon. The malt shop. Meanwhile, something deeply unsettling was happening inside the malt shop. Chaos stood behind the counter when the front door opened. A man walked in slowly, tall, thin, wearing tactical boots. He carried a battered Louisville Slugger baseball bat across his shoulder. Chaos frowned. "Can I help you?" The man smiled faintly. "You could say that." He sat down at the counter, ordered a milkshake, then began tapping the bat against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Chaos leaned forward. "You okay?" The man looked at him calmly. "I used to be part of a military battalion." Chaos nodded slowly. "That explains the boots." The man continued. "We were deployed in a French jungle once." Chaos blinked. "I didn't know France had jungles." The man smiled wider. "It does now." Then he whispered something strange. "I'm bulletproof." Chaos stepped back slightly.
All right.
"This conversation is escalating." The man slammed the bat onto the counter. Milkshake glasses rattled. Chaos whispered under his breath, "Oh." Time to start de-escalating. The convent grounds. The strangest event of the day happened behind the convent. Janet the slime troll was walking across the lawn when she noticed something wrong with the soil. Fresh dirt, recently disturbed. A shallow grave. Janet knelt beside it. She brushed away the dirt. Her eyes widened. Inside the grave, an entire family. 3 bodies, perfectly arranged. No wounds, no blood. Just blank expressions frozen in death. Janet whispered, "Oh, no." Dorothea ran toward her.
What is it?
Janet pointed. Dorothea covered her mouth.
Who would do this?
Janet examined the bodies carefully. Something strange caught her eye. Their fingers. Each one had frost forming on it. Janet frowned. Frostbite. Dorothea blinked. But it's 80 degrees outside. Janet looked toward the forest. Something cold is moving through the town. Back at the call center. Youngblood finally reached work, still holding the MC Donald's bag, still dealing with his situation. Nanook looked up from his desk.
You appear...
Youngblood dropped into his chair.
You ever hear...
Ella Fitzgerald? Nanook nodded.
Yes.
Youngblood sighed. She could make sorrow sound beautiful. He held up the bag. Also, I found $30,000. Nanak blinked once. That complicates things. Youngblood nodded. Everything complicates things. Then he leaned forward. Also, I think someone's following me. Nanak's eyes narrowed slightly.
Who?
Youngblood whispered.
Don't now.
But when I turned the corner earlier, he lowered his voice. I saw Loon. Nanak went still. That's impossible. Youngblood shook his head. He looked different.
How?
Youngblood whispered, like something had fractured inside him. The truth begins to surface. That night, Dorothea gathered everyone inside the convent. Chaos, Clotilde, Gumbo, Youngblood, Nanook, Janet. Dorothea spoke quietly. We have 3 major problems. She raised 3 fingers. First, something is awakening under the town. Second, people are dying in ways we don't understand. Third, Loon is alive, Chaos added. And apparently someone buried a frozen family behind the convent. Gumbo sighed. This is getting out of hand. Janet nodded.
Yes.
But there's one more thing. Everyone turned to her. Janet pointed toward the window. Outside, the hair-covered trees were glowing faintly in the moonlight, like thousands of strands of living fiber, Janet whispered. They're not just growing. Dorothea asked quietly.
What are they doing?
Janet answered. They're communicating. The wind moved through the branches, like whispers passing through a gigantic nervous system. And somewhere in the forest, Loon stood watching the town, his eyes glowing faintly, his voice trembling with rage and confusion. I remember everything now, he whispered. The trees shivered in response, like a million voices answering back. Chapter 10. The Necessary Evil. The town woke that morning with the uneasy feeling that the universe had quietly adjusted the furniture while everyone slept. The trees were worse, much worse. Their long hair now stretched across streets and sidewalks like living cables. Some strands had wrapped themselves around balusters, others draped over mailboxes and power lines. The entire town looked like it had been swallowed by a gigantic wig. Chaos stepped out of the house wearing neon sneakers and holding baby Germaine. He looked up at the branches.
Well... He sighed.
That's new. Germaine sneezed. Chaos nodded. Correct reaction. Meanwhile, Youngblood and Nanak were driving slowly down a narrow one-way street that led toward the old wooded glen outside town. Youngblood gripped the wheel. You ever feel like something's about to happen that's tantamount to a catastrophe? Nanook nodded calmly.
Yes.
That is exactly how I feel. Youngblood sighed. Great. They passed a strange roadside structure. An old wigwam someone had built decades earlier as a tourist attraction. A few yards away stood a novelty igloo made from fiberglass. Youngblood blinked. This town has the architectural sense of a fever dream. Nanook smiled faintly. People build strange things when they are afraid. At the convent, Dorothea was standing in the secret room staring into the mirror again. Clotilde stood beside her. You think Conception will speak again? Dorothea nodded slowly. Probably when we need it least. The mirror flickered. Then went dark. Clotilde sighed. Figures. Outside on the lawn. Janet, the slime troll, was investigating the shallow grave again. She scratched her chin thoughtfully. These bodies... Dorothea walked over. What about them? Janet pointed to the frost patterns again.
This wasn't a murder.
Dorothea blinked. What do you mean? Janet sighed. It was a freak accident. Dorothea stared at her. Explain. Janet gestured toward the forest. Something cold moved through the area very quickly, like a biological shock wave. Dorothea frowned. Loon. Janet nodded.
Yes.
Across town. At the blind school, the Olympic torch was still burning. The flame had never gone out. A visiting hypnotist hired for the school's fundraiser stood staring at it. He whispered to the principal, I think the flame is reacting to psychic activity. The principal blinked. I hired you to do card tricks. The hypnotist shrugged. Sometimes the mind opens doors. Back at the malt shop, the strange man with the baseball bat had finally left. Chaos sat behind the counter, rubbing his face. That was exhausting. Gumbo nodded. Guy had serious alpha dog rage. Chaos pointed at the door. He said he was bulletproof. Gumbo shrugged. Lots of people say strange things. Chaos leaned back. You know what this town needs?
What?
A hypnotherapist. Later that afternoon, Youngblood and Nanook reached the wooded glen. The road ended. Youngblood stepped out of the car. The air smelled like damp leaves and something older.
Okay, he said.
Why are we here? Nanook walked into the trees. Because this is where the experiment started. Youngblood froze. The what? Nanook turned slowly. My people have known about this place for a long time. Youngblood stared. So you're not just some guy from Alaska?
No. You're what, exactly?
Nanook thought for a moment. Think of me as a guardian angel. Youngblood laughed. You've got to be kidding. Nanook shrugged. Guardian angels come in many disguises. Back in town, Cora sat in her kitchen baking banana bread while trying to plan the most chaotic wedding in human history. Her mother burst through the door. I just saw someone pawning Mama's Furbies because they were high on toot. Cora blinked. I hate this town. Meanwhile, the trees suddenly trembled. All of them. Every branch, every strand of hair. Like nerves firing inside a gigantic organism. Janet felt it first. She looked toward the horizon. Oh no. Chaos stepped outside.
What?
Janet pointed toward the sky. A strange ripple of energy moved across the clouds, like a silent coup d'etat taking place inside the atmosphere. Dorothea whispered. The system is rebooting. Youngblood arrived seconds later. What system? Janet answered quietly. The one under the town. For a moment, everything went still. The wind stopped. The trees froze. Even the birds fell silent. Then the ground trembled slightly. Just once, like a sleeping giant shifting in its bed. Chaos exhaled slowly.
Well...
That's unsettling. Chapter 11. Signals in the glass. The message arrived in the most inappropriate place imaginable. Youngblood was standing inside the gas station restroom on the feeder road, staring at himself in a cracked mirror while an empty energy drink can rattled in the trash bin behind him. The fluorescent lights flickered. Youngblood squinted. Great, he muttered. Carbon monoxide poisoning or a nervous breakdown. Then the mirror fogged over. Not from steam. From the inside. Words began to appear slowly across the glass. Not written. Tapped. Short marks. Long marks. Youngblood blinked. Morse code? Tap. Tap, tap. Tap. Youngblood stared harder. The shapes began rearranging themselves into letters. Conception. He sighed.
Good.
The haunted mirror is back, the message continued. Time has run out. Youngblood leaned closer. You could have opened with hello. The glass rippled again. Another name appeared beneath it. Sister Supreme. Youngblood straightened. Now, hold on. The bathroom stall door burst open. A gust of wind blew through the room, carrying the faint scent of cornbread and cheap perfume. Standing behind him, hands on hips, glittering gold stockings, rhinestone heels, and a purple corseted gown that looked like it had escaped from Studio 54 during a fire drill, was Sister Supreme, the brash Latina drag queen guardian angel from another life. She smirked.
Well, look at you, baby.
Youngblood rubbed his eyes. Either I'm hallucinating or the afterlife has a very aggressive dress code. Sister Supreme snapped her fingers. Oh, honey, please. I've been sent on important celestial business. She leaned toward the mirror. Conception, you ready? The glass shimmered again. Now, two faces appeared faintly in the reflection. Conception, and something else. Something ancient. The message appeared in full. The trees are signals. The system below is waking. A choice must be made. Youngblood rubbed his forehead. I hate choices. The gathering. Within the hour, everyone had gathered inside the convent. Chaos. Dorothea. Clotilde. Gumbo. Janet the slime troll. Nanook. Youngblood. Ralph the parrot perched dramatically on a chair back. Sister Supreme paced the room like a general preparing for battle. All right, listen up, children. She pointed dramatically. This town is sitting on a biological communication system that's been sending alien signals into space for about 100 years. Chaos blinked. So we're basically living inside a space telephone. Exactly. Janet nodded. The hair-growing trees are the antennae. Dorothea crossed herself.
Dear God.
Sister Supreme continued. And now something has answered the call. Silence filled the room. Youngblood leaned forward. So what's the choice? The mirror on the wall flickered again. Conception's message appeared. Shut the system down. Or complete the signal. Chaos sighed. Between a rock and a hard place. The monologue. At this point, Ralph cleared his throat loudly. "Before we proceed," the parrot announced, "I feel compelled to address a matter of grave importance." Everyone stared. Ralph puffed his chest. "Big birds cannot be trusted." Chaos groaned.
Oh no.
Ralph launched into a full speech. "You look at creatures like ostriches and emus and cassowaries and tell me that's normal behavior. Running around with those prehistoric necks like a bunch of feathered mob bosses. Don't even get me started on flamingos. Suspicious posture. And pelicans? Absolutely not. A bird with a grocery bag attached to its face is clearly hiding something." Janet whispered to Dorothea. "Is this relevant?" Ralph continued, "Mark my words. When the cosmic reckoning arrives, it'll be the big birds that sell us out first." Chaos pinched the bridge of his nose. "Thank you, Ralph. The clue." Conception's message continued appearing in the mirror. The control node is beneath the old fairgrounds. Youngblood frowned. "That abandoned carnival?" Janet nodded slowly. "Yes." The system's root. Sister Supreme crossed her arms. "That's where the decision gets made." Nanak spoke calmly. "If we shut it down, the signal stops forever." Dorothea asked quietly, "And if we..." Janet answered. "We find out who answered." Chaos leaned back. "So we either save the town or invite the universe over for dinner." The strange interruption. Suddenly, a small voice echoed from Youngblood's pocket. Everyone froze. Youngblood reached in, pulled out the talking kidney stone. It blinked slowly, then spoke in a dry whisper. "Signal not enemy." Pause.
Signal invitation.
It yawned, then added, "Also, someone left plant fertilizer in the microwave again." The stone fell silent. Everyone stared. Chaos sighed. "Of course it did." Sister Supreme's warning. Sister Supreme stood in the center of the room. "All right, children. Here's the situation." She pointed toward the dark horizon. Under the abandoned fairgrounds is a control chamber. Inside, it is the heart of the signal. Tonight, we go down there. Chaos scratched his head. "Is there a plan?" Sister Supreme smirked. "Of course there's a plan." Youngblood asked cautiously, "What kind of plan?" She grinned. "The kind where we improvise heroically while screaming."
Meanwhile,
Far outside town,
in the woods.
loons stood beneath the whispering trees. Their hair brushed against his shoulders like living wires. He whispered softly. I can hear them now. The sky shimmered faintly, like distant bright yellow signals moving through the clouds. Something was coming, and it had already begun listening. The choice was approaching. The fairgrounds waited, and whatever answered the signal was getting closer.
Chapter 12. The government arrives. The first strange thing that morning happened to Dorothea. She was standing in the convent kitchen peeling boiled eggs while Janet, the slime troll, attempted to make banana pudding using a recipe that involved 3 ingredients nobody could identify. Outside the window, the hairy trees rustled softly. Dorothea suddenly stopped. Her nose began bleeding. Not a gentle trickle. A full nosebleed, bright red, spilling down her lip and onto the kitchen floor. Janet looked up. Dorothea pressed a towel to her face. The room tilted. For a moment, Dorothea saw something that wasn't there. Instead, she saw a vast underground chamber filled with machines older than memory pipes, wires, and a massive sphere humming softly like a planet-sized pocket watch. Voices echoed through her mind. Signals! Then the vision snapped away. Dorothea staggered backward. That thing under the fairgrounds.
Janet froze.
What about it?
Dorothea whispered.
Gumbo's discovery. Meanwhile, Gumbo was riding the crosstown bus toward the abandoned fairgrounds. The bus rattled past rundown houses and a field that smelled heavily of horse manure. Across the aisle sat a group of loud yellow hillbilly mountain people arguing about a professional wrestler who had recently run for governor. Gumbo tried to ignore them. But something in his pocket vibrated. A message appeared, not from anyone he knew. Just a short video clip. Gumbo pressed play. The video showed government officials sitting around a conference table. One of them a nervous stockbroker-looking lawyer type with frosted highlights and the permanent smile of a New York.
Paris model who had wandered into the wrong career was speaking urgently.
"We cannot allow the signal to complete," the man said. Second voice interrupted. "If the public finds out this town has been running evil experiments since the 1940s, we'll have congressional hearings until the sun burns out." Another official said quietly. "Halcassu Parish already reported strange signals last night." Someone muttered. "Shut it down before it becomes a scandal." The video ended. Gumbo sat back slowly. It's troubling. The government plan. Elsewhere, far away in a secure federal building, the government was already moving. Inside a conference room with dull beige carpet, 3 agencies argued about what to do. The Department of Energy insisted the underground system was an abandoned Cold War communications project.
The military insisted it might be alien contact. A third department, one that technically did not exist, insisted the town was part of a psychological mind control experiment originally designed to monitor human reaction to supernatural stimuli.
One official sighed. "Look, we've got reports of glowing trees, mutant bodies, frozen families, and now a drag queen guardian angel running around." Another official rubbed his temples. "Deploy the response team and keep the public distracted. Release something about coal miners protesting in West Virginia. Secret." Back in town, Youngblood was cutting through the convent hallway when he heard a strange voice coming from the hall closet. He pushed the door open. Carl sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by dolls. Not ordinary dolls. Antique porcelain dolls. Each one arranged carefully like a tiny menagerie. Carl held one up and spoke to it softly.
"You're the lawyer, and you're the stockbroker, and you're the demons pretending to be angels."
Carl froze, slowly turned his head. His expression changed instantly. Calculating. She stood up and closed the closet door.
"You didn't see that."
Youngblood laughed nervously. "Buddy, you were playing dolls." Step closer.
"Do you like secrets, Youngblood?"
He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small device.
Smirk.
"You remember the night at the malt shop when you said some very colorful things about the mayor?" Youngblood went pale, smiled wider. "Keep my little hobby a secret, or that recording goes everywhere." Youngblood stared at him. "You're diabolical." Shrugged. "I learned from the best. The food fight."
Later that afternoon, the group gathered at the convent kitchen to discuss the situation.
Tension filled the room. Chaos slammed a bowl of tapioca onto the table. Gumbo raised a spoon. Janet accidentally knocked over the banana pudding. Within seconds, someone threw a boiled egg. Someone else launched a scoop of pudding. Chaos ducked as a bowl of tapioca exploded against the wall. The convent kitchen erupted into a full cafeteria food fight. Someone even hurled a plate of cornbread. Dorothea stared in disbelief. Something cruel. The laughter ended suddenly. A scream came from outside. Behind the barn, a man was running through the mud. The strange man from the malt shop. The one with the Louisville slugger. He stumbled toward them bleeding badly, his hand clearly broken. A farmer stood beside a pig pen holding a Glock 9 pistol. The pigs were already circling hungrily. The farmer shouted. Chaos whispered, "Maybe we should call an ambulance." "Too late!" The pigs surged forward. The farmer turned away grimly. Within seconds, the screaming stopped. Silence fell over the yard. Janet whispered softly, "Well, Dorothea's second vision." As everyone stood stunned, Dorothea suddenly swayed again. The nosebleed returned. Eyes rolled back. She spoke in a strange whisper. "The chamber..." Her voice echoed unnaturally. It was never meant to contact aliens." Chaos stepped closer. "Then what was it for?" Dorothea's voice trembled. The wind rustled the hairy trees. Far away under the fairgrounds, the ancient signal pulsed again. Something on the other side had heard it. And it was answering. Chapter 13. The girl with the impossible name. Pandemonium had become the town's default setting. At the malt shop, Chaos was wiping the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of Windex and burnt sugar when the front door opened, and someone new walked in. She was tall. Tall in a way that made the ceiling fan seem suddenly nervous. Long black hair, olive skin, and an expression that suggested she had already seen enough nonsense in life to last several lifetimes. She wore a leather jacket over a mint green dress and carried a canvas bag that clinked suspiciously. Chaos blinked. Can I help you? She set the bag down on the counter.
My name, she said calmly, is Klapamazi Hatuga. Chaos blinked again. I'm going to need you to repeat that.
Chaos nodded slowly. That's a Times Square billboard of a name. She shrugged.
My grandmother named me. Chaos gestured toward the empty kitchen. You here for a milkshake?
She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Chaos read it.
You're applying to work here?
Chaos scratched his head. You ever worked in food service before? She nodded. 3 years at a meat plant in Shreveport. Chaos winced.
All right.
Across town, Cora was sitting alone in her living room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. A vase of roses sat on the coffee table. Her wedding dress hung over the back of a chair like a ghost that had lost interest in haunting people.
She stared at the television.
A news report from Baton Rouge was playing. The anchor was talking about unusual atmospheric disturbances.
Strange radio signals.
Government officials refusing comment.
Cora sighed. She had tried to stay out of it. Tried to pretend the chaos in town had nothing to do with her. But every instinct inside her screamed otherwise.
Phone buzzed. A message from Chaos. We need you.
She stared at the screen.
She muttered. Quiet time is officially over. The government's next move. In a temporary command center outside town, federal officials were reviewing satellite images. The aerial photos showed the trees forming strange patterns. Like symbols. Like watchtowers made of hair.
One analyst whispered.
It's not random growth.
Another nodded.
It's a network.
The director leaned forward.
Signal completes. What happens?
The analyst swallowed.
Silence filled the room. Finally, the director spoke again.
Prepare containment.
Someone asked quietly. The director shook his head. Psychological. Trouble for Gumbo.
Back in town, Gumbo had wandered behind the gas station, scratching his arms.
Flea bites.
He stared at the ground. The dirt smelled strange.
Like freshly cut grass with a wild onion scent rising from it. Gumbo frowned. Then he noticed something sticking out of the dirt. Small metal device. He pulled it free. Gumbo blinked.
He turned slowly.
It's the road. A black sedan sat quietly. Gumbo muttered. Well, that explains the surveillance.
Back at the malt shop, Klopemazi Hatuga had already taken over the grill like a seasoned general.
Chaos watched her work.
She's surprisingly good at this.
She shrugged. Hunger pangs are powerful motivation. Chaos nodded. So... She paused, then said quietly, my brother was murdered when he was 19. Chaos froze. She nodded.
The investigation was buried.
Chaos asked softly,
Do you think it happened here?
She looked him directly in the eye. I know it did.
Cora returns.
That evening, the convent door burst open.
Cora stepped inside.
Well, look who decided to come back. Tossed her purse onto a chair.
Summoning demons, and why wasn't I invited?
Chaos grinned. There she is.
Janet the slime troll clapped excitedly.
Perfect timing. Cora looked around. Tilled.
So what did I miss?
Chaos sighed. Alien signals. Demonic communication networks. A pig-related homicide. Cora blinked.
Sounds about right. Carl again. Stairs.
Youngblood pushed open Carl's bedroom door. Sat at his desktop computer calmly arranging something on the screen. Youngblood squinted. Are those desktop dildos? Carl didn't look up. They're 3D modeling references.
Youngblood stared.
Smirked.
You keeping my secret?
Youngblood sighed. Carl nodded.
Then he whispered quietly, You might want to check the roof.
Youngblood frowned. Shrugged. Someone's watching. Chaos climbed onto the convent rooftop. The wind was cool. The trees rustled softly below. And standing near the chimney, watching the horizon, was Klapamazi Hatuga.
Chaos blinked. Did you get up here?
She shrugged.
Treadmill training.
Chaos looked out toward the forest. The hair-covered trees were forming shapes again. Caught in invisible wind. What do you see? He asked. She pointed. Far away in the distance,
a massive structure was rising from the earth beneath the fairgrounds.
Stone.
Ancient machinery.
Chaos whispered. The ground trembled again. Fight or flight.
That ancient human instinct began waking up in everyone.
Klapamazi Hatuga smiled slightly. This should be interesting. The signal grew stronger.
Chapter 14.
Small miracles, large problems.
The barn behind the convent smelled like hay, warm dust, and the unmistakable perfume of a barnyard that had seen better centuries. Chaos sat on an overturned crate holding baby Germaine. The baby blinked up at him with wide eyes and a suspiciously calm expression for someone who had been alive for approximately 3 weeks.
Outside, the trees whispered softly in the daylight saving time dusk. Chaos sighed.
Well, kid, he said quietly, your father is 19. Your town is possessed by alien trees, and the government is spying on everybody.
Tremaine gurgled. Chaos laughed.
Do you think that's funny?
Then the strange thing happened. Tremaine lifted his tiny hand. A glass Coca-Cola bottle sitting on the barn shelf rattled. Chaos froze. The bottle lifted slowly into the air.
Just hovered there.
Like gravity had taken a coffee break. Chaos whispered. The bottle drifted gently across the room and landed on a wooden crate. Tremaine giggled. Chaos stared at the baby. She did that. Tremaine blinked again. A small banana peel slid across the floor toward Chaos like a polite little demonstration. Chaos looked around nervously. She leaned closer to the baby. This stays between us. Tremaine drooled approvingly. Chaos shook his head. Your Uncle Gumbo already has enough trouble controlling his powers. If people find out a newborn can do it too. He glanced toward the trees. They'll never leave you alone. The government already knows. This town inside a temporary command trailer parked behind City Hall. Federal analysts were studying surveillance footage. One screen showed Chaos inside the barn. Another showed the floating bottle. An agent tapped the monitor. The director sighed. Scientist adjusted his glasses. Early telekinetic expression. Another analyst whispered, "It's impossible." Scientist shrugged. The director folded his hands. "So what do we do?" The scientist answered quietly. The director frowned. The scientist gestured toward another screen showing the rapidly growing forest of hairy trees. "We have a catch-22. If we try to remove the child, the system below the town could react. And if the system reacts..." He didn't finish the sentence. The director nodded slowly. "Keep watching him. The first resolved problem." Back at the convent, Dorothea gathered everyone for a coffee klatch in the kitchen. Janet poured coffee while Chaos explained what had happened in the barn, carefully leaving out one tiny detail. Gumbo leaned against the counter. "Let's focus." He pointed toward the fairgrounds. "That underground machine." Dorothea nodded. "I finally understand it." She held up an ancient spell book she had discovered hidden behind one of the convent's false walls. The pages smelled faintly of plant incense. Dorothea explained. "The signal system was never meant to summon demons." Chaos blinked. "But that's what the vision said." Dorothea shook her head. "That's what the experimenters thought." She turned the page. "The machine was designed to detect something far smaller." Youngblood frowned. "Smaller than demons?" Dorothea nodded. "Nanotechnology." The room went silent. Janet whispered, "The hair trees..." Dorothea nodded. "Tiny machines inside the soil. They communicate through the trees." Chaos stared at the book. "So the system isn't supernatural." Janet shrugged. "The second resolved problem." Youngblood raised his hand. "What about Loon?" Dorothea sighed. "Loon didn't die." Chaos nodded slowly. "We kind of figured that." Dorothea explained. "The nanites inside the soil infected him. Changed him. Rebuilt his nervous system." Youngblood whispered, "So he's alive." Janet nodded. "But barely human." Cora sat inside a small seafood restaurant down by the river. She watched the water quietly while tapping a magic marker against a napkin. Her mind raced. Everything in town was spiraling toward something huge. The waitress dropped off a plate of fried trout. Cora sighed. "I was supposed to be planning a wedding." The waitress shrugged. "Honey..." Everybody thinks their life is a freak accident. Carl's new game. Upstairs at the convent, Carl sat at his desk studying something under a small microscope. Youngblood peeked over his shoulder. Tal didn't look up. "Sample from the soil near the fairgrounds." Youngblood squinted. "Looks like tiny Pac-Man shapes." Carl nodded. Tiny machines moved across the slide. "Multiplying," Carl whispered. "They're building something. Something rising." Chaos stood outside near the barn again, holding baby Germaine. The wind rustled the trees. Far away near the fairgrounds, the earth opened slightly. A massive metallic structure rose slowly from underground, like an ancient watchtower emerging from a forgotten cave. Chaos whispered. Germaine waved his tiny hand again. A nearby pitchfork lifted gently into the air. Chaos caught it quickly and shoved it back into the dirt. "About this," Germaine giggled. "The realization." Inside the convent, Dorothea wiped teardrops from her face. She looked at the spellbook again. "This system," Janet asked quietly. "What about it?" Dorothea answered. "It isn't finished." Sigh. The machine rising beneath the fairgrounds hummed louder. The trees swayed. The nanites multiplied. And the signal grew stronger. Somewhere far away, something had finally noticed the call.
Chapter 15. The disappearance. The first sign that something had shifted again came when the trees stopped whispering. For weeks, the hairy oak trees had rustled constantly, like nervous old women gossiping across a fence. Now they were silent, dead still. Chaos noticed it first, while sitting on the back porch, holding baby Germaine. The baby was staring at a spoon. The spoon bent slowly in half. Chaos groaned.
"Kid."
"We've discussed this." Germaine giggled and clapped. The spoon straightened again, then bent the other direction. Chaos rubbed his face. "So we're just openly bending objects with the mind now." Germaine responded by levitating a handful of rubber bands off the porch table. Chaos sighed. "Fantastic. Anai returns. A distant sound echoed down the road. Hoofbeats. Chaos looked up. Trotting proudly down the dirt lane came Anai, the magical horse who had been away visiting family in Kansas City. She wore decorative puka shells braided into her mane and what appeared to be a very confident pair of snakeskin boots on her front hooves. Chaos blinked.
Honey.
The horse nodded proudly. Yes. Vacation was lovely. Chaos stared. Horses don't normally talk. Anne snorted. Neither do babies that bend spoons.
Fair point.
She trotted closer to Germain and studied him. Chaos raised an eyebrow. What? Anne lowered her voice. That child is extremely dangerous. Chaos shifted nervously. I was afraid you'd say that. The babysitter. Later that evening, Chaos needed to meet the others at the convent to discuss the rising machine beneath the fairgrounds. Clope Mazihatuga offered to babysit. She stood in the kitchen wearing a loose, tattered sundress, casually eating a bowl of black olives while examining Germain. Chaos hesitated. You sure you're good with babies? She shrugged. I survived a childhood with a drug dealer uncle and a lawyer aunt who thought therapy was a government conspiracy. Chaos nodded slowly. Okay, then. He placed Germain gently into her arms. Bottles in the fridge. She saluted him. Go save the town. The meeting. Inside the convent dining hall, the group gathered again. Chaos. Gumbo. Dorothea. Youngblood. Janet. Cora. Anai stood quietly near the door, chewing thoughtfully on a bowl of cat food someone had accidentally left nearby. Chaos slammed a notebook onto the table.
All right.
The underground machine is almost fully above ground. Janet nodded. It's acting like a time bomb, Dorothea whispered. How much time? Janet shrugged. Unknown. Youngblood leaned back in his chair. This whole situation feels like we're raw dogging it with the apocalypse. Cora blinked. That's a horrifying metaphor. Government panic. Meanwhile, inside the Federal Command trailer, the surveillance team watched the monitors nervously. One agent whispered, "The babysitter." The director leaned forward. Clope Mazihatuga appeared on the screen holding Germain. Another analyst spoke up. We're still tracking nanite movement beneath the fairgrounds. A scientist rubbed his temples. If the baby interacts with that system, the director interrupted. We could have nuclear fallout levels of disruption. The analyst nodded. Exactly. The director sighed. We are one toddler away from the collapse of reality. Meanwhile, Clope Mazihatuga. Back at the house, Clope Mazihatuga rocked Germain gently while humming a strange tune that sounded suspiciously like Debbie Gibson. Germain giggled. She looked down at him. You're an unusual kid. Germain responded by levitating a rolling pin off the counter. Clope Mazihatuga blinked.
Well...
That's new. Then something strange happened. The kitchen light flickered. The baby monitor crackled. The television turned itself on. The Roku menu scrolled rapidly across the screen. Germain pointed toward the window. Outside. The trees were moving again. All of them. Every branch. Every hair-covered trunk. Clope Mazihatuga frowned. That can't be good. The strange signal. Suddenly, the baby monitor emitted a sound. 3 short beeps. 3 long beeps. 3 short beeps. Clope Mazihatuga tilted her head. Morse code? Germaine clapped. She looked out the window again. The trees had formed a pattern, a giant arrow, pointing toward the fairgrounds. Clopemazi-Hatuga whispered,
Are you summoning something?
Germaine giggled. The discovery. Back at the convent, the group was deep in discussion when Chaos suddenly froze. He felt something, like a sudden vacuum in the air. He stood up. I need to check on Germaine. The house. Chaos ran into the house. The front door was open. The living room was empty. The television was still glowing faintly. The baby swing moved slowly back and forth. Chaos whispered,
No.
He rushed into the kitchen. Nothing. No baby. No babysitter. Just a bowl of spilled cotton balls and a strange smell like olive oil and electricity. Chaos ran upstairs. Nothing. Then he noticed something on the kitchen floor. A single broken rosary bead. Chaos whispered,
Oh, no.
The realization. Back at the convent, Chaos burst through the door. They're gone. Cora stood up.
What?
Clopemazi-Hatuga and Germaine. Everyone froze. Janet asked quietly, Taken? Chaos shook his head slowly. I don't know. Anne the horse stepped forward. Her eyes glowed faintly. The trees know. Chaos looked at her. Can you track them? Anne nodded once. But you're not going to like where they went. Chaos swallowed.
Where?
Anne turned toward the horizon. The fairgrounds. The machine rising from the earth hummed louder. And somewhere inside that enormous structure, a baby was laughing. Chapter 16. The fairgrounds. The abandoned fairgrounds looked like the world's saddest carnival. Broken rides, a rusted gazebo listing sideways, a cracked ticket booth that smelled faintly of sassafras, rainwater, and the kind of melancholy that gathers in forgotten places. Dust rolled across the open field like little tumbleweeds, stirring the dirt. Chaos arrived first, running across the field with Gumbo and Cora close behind. In the center of the fairgrounds, the massive metal structure that had risen from underground loomed like a half-built cathedral made by engineers who had studied both rocket science and Beelzebub. Metal ribs curved into the sky. Hairs from the surrounding trees plugged directly into the structure like living wires. Janet the slime troll squinted.
Well,
That's mind-boggling. The first resolution. Anai the magical horse trotted forward slowly. Her hooves clicked against old concrete. She sniffed the air. I can feel the nanites, she said quietly. Chaos frowned. You can? Yes. They're confused. Janet leaned closer to the machine. They're following a signal pattern. She pointed to the trees. Those trees were never antennas. Chaos blinked. What do you mean? Janet smiled. They're filters, Dorothea gasped softly. The system wasn't summoning demons. Janet shook her head. No. It was designed to protect the world. She tapped the metal structure. This machine absorbs dangerous signals from space. Chaos rubbed his face. So the experiment actually worked. Janet nodded. Mostly. The second resolution. Youngblood approached holding Carl's microscope slide. Remember the nanites Carl found? Janet nodded. They're repairing the system. Chaos looked around. So the town wasn't cursed. Janet smiled. It was chosen. The realization washed over everyone. For the first time in weeks, the panic eased. Just a little. Room to breathe. Meanwhile, inside the structure, deep within the machine, Clope Hatuga sat on the floor holding baby Jermaine. The baby giggled happily. She looked around the enormous chamber. Old books, rusted computers, stacks of forgotten equipment. The place smelled like old dust, electricity, and the faint odor of fresh flowers someone must have left decades ago. Jermaine floated a small lollipop in front of his face like a toy spaceship. Clopamazi Hatuga sighed. You kidnapped me, didn't you? Jermaine clapped. Outside trouble. Back outside, Chaos finally noticed something strange. Cora was staring at a figure standing near the old Ferris wheel. A man. Tall. Handsome. Wearing a rumpled suit. Sean? She whispered. The group turned. Sean stepped forward slowly. He looked tired, like someone who had been living several lives at once. Chaos crossed his arms. Well, look who finally showed up. Sean's secret. Cora walked toward him carefully. Where have you been? Sean rubbed his face. It's complicated. Chaos snorted. Everything in this town is complicated. Sean sighed. All right. He gestured toward the massive machine. I work for the government. Everyone froze. Cora stared.
You're...
Sean shook his head. I was sent here months ago to monitor the system. Chaos groaned. So this whole time you've been spying on us? Sean nodded slowly. At first. He looked down. But then things got personal. Cora folded her arms. You disappeared during the worst part of this. Sean nodded. I was ordered to leave town because the government believes Jermaine could control the nanites. Chaos muttered. Great. The rescue. Suddenly, Anae raised her head. They're inside. Chaos looked at Janet. Let's go. They entered the machine through a narrow service tunnel. The interior looked like an abandoned laboratory green carpeted stairs, tangled wires, a dusty upright piano shoved against a wall for reasons no one could explain. Janet sniffed the air. Baby smell. Chaos followed the sound of giggling. They turned a corner. And there was Jermaine floating a bowling ball 6 inches off the floor. Clopamazi Hatuga waved.
Ah, good.
You found us. Chaos grabbed the baby. Kid. We've talked about this. Jermaine laughed. Janet checked the machinery. I can stabilize the system. Anae stepped forward. And I can redirect the signal. Chaos smiled. Teamwork. Janet flipped a lever. Anae stomped her hoof. The machine hummed. The trees outside relaxed. The signal faded. For a moment, it looked like they had saved the day. Then Jermaine clapped. The nanites reacted instantly. A pulse of energy shot through the machine. Every screen flickered. A giant hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. A map. Not of Earth. Chaos stared.
Well?
That's new, Janet whispered.
Oh no.
The machine had locked onto a response signal. Something out there had answered. The new problem. Back outside the structure. Cora and Sean stood arguing quietly near the old gazebo. You lied to me, she said. Sean nodded.
I know.
But I stayed because of you. Cora laughed bitterly. That's the oldest line in every romance novel. Sean stepped closer. You still love me. Cora sighed. Unfortunately. Sean hesitated. There's something else. Cora frowned.
What?
Sean lowered his voice. The government believes Germain isn't the only one with those abilities. Cora felt her stomach drop. Who else? Sean looked directly at her. You. Meanwhile, back inside the machine, Chaos held Germain carefully. Janet studied the hologram. Anne stared at the glowing coordinates. Chaos sighed. All right. Who did we just call? Janet answered quietly. Something very old. The hologram pulsed again. Far out in the darkness of space, something had noticed the signal, and it was already on its way. Chaos looked down at Germain. You and I need to have a long talk. Germain smiled innocently. Chaos sighed. Kid, this is getting ridiculous. And somewhere, deep beneath the fairgrounds, the machine began preparing for its next transmission. Chapter 17. The Back Room. The convent was old enough that some of its hallways still smelled like the ghosts of candles and incense burned 50 years earlier. Dust hung in the air. The building had the quiet uneasiness of an old smelling building that had witnessed too many confessions and too many secrets. That night, most of the group had gone to the fairgrounds again to study the strange hologram message that the machine had created. But Clotilde had stayed behind. Someone had to answer the phone if emergency dispatch called again. The convent office was small. A desk, a dusty display counter full of religious pamphlets, lockers along one wall that had once belonged to students decades ago. Clotilde was halfway through a cup of tea when the lights flickered. She frowned. Hello? No answer. Just the creak of floorboards somewhere deeper in the convent. Carl unravels. Carl stepped out of the darkness of the hallway. His hair looked wild, his shirt half-buttoned, his eyes bright in a way that suggested a mind spinning too fast. Clotilde relaxed a little.
Oh,
Carl smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. More like the smile of someone who had been thinking too hard about something for too long. You stayed behind, he said quietly. Clotilde nodded. Someone had to. Carl walked slowly across the polished granite floor. You ever notice, he said, how the smartest people are always the last to understand what's happening? Clotilde frowned. What are you talking about? Carl sighed. You all think this town is about nanotechnology, signals, aliens. He leaned closer. It's not. Before Clotilde could react, Carl grabbed her wrists and pulled her toward one of the old storage rooms. The back room. The storage room had once been used for choir robes. Now it was mostly forgotten. Boxes of chenille altar cloths, stacks of old hymn books, a faint smell of incense. Carl tied Clotilde to a wooden chair with careful precision. Not violently, almost methodically. Clotilde struggled. Carl, stop. Carl shook his head. You're clever, Clotilde, but not clever enough. He set a small metal tray on the table. Candles, a rope, a pocket knife. Nothing lethal, but enough to frighten someone. Clotilde glared at him. You've lost your mind. Carl smiled thinly. No, I've found it. He leaned closer. You know what this town really is? Clotilde stayed silent. Carl whispered. A laboratory. Carl's theory. Carl paced the room. You think those nanites are repairing something. He laughed softly.
No, they're studying us.
He pointed upward, watching human behavior.
Fear. Faith.
Violence. Clotilde shook her head.
That's absurd.
Carl slammed his hand on the table. Is IT? His voice echoed down the hallway. Every crisis, every death, every strange coincidence. He leaned closer. Someone designed it, Clotilde whispered. You sound insane. Carl smiled again. That's what they always say. Outside the convent. Meanwhile, Chaos and the others had returned from the fairgrounds. Anai stopped suddenly in the courtyard. Her ears twitched. Something's wrong. Janet sniffed the air.
Fear.
Chaos ran toward the building. The closet problem. Inside the hallway, Youngblood was following Gumbo when Ralph the parrot suddenly shouted, Attention, everyone. I have an announcement. Chaos groaned. Ralph, not now. Ralph puffed his chest. I believe I may be experiencing a moment of personal revelation. He glanced dramatically around the room, specifically regarding my identity.
Chaos blinked.
You're a parrot. Ralph looked offended. I mean, socially. Youngblood sighed. Are you trying to say you're gay? Ralph opened his beak. Chaos interrupted. Great.
Wonderful.
Congratulations. But right now, someone might be dying. Ralph sulked. No one ever has time to listen. The secret garden. As they ran past the rear courtyard, Youngblood noticed something odd behind the tool shed. A patch of very suspicious plants. Janet paused. Are those marijuana plants? Chaos blinked. We'll deal with that later. The rescue. Chaos kicked open the storage room door. Inside, Carl held a candle close to the rope, binding Clotilde.
Ah, Carl said calmly.
The heroes arrive. Chaos stepped forward.
Let her go.
Carl shook his head. You're all too late. He gestured to the walls. You think the system is out there. He tapped his temple. It's in here. Gumbo moved closer.
Carl.
Put the candle down. Carl laughed. You know what fascinates me? He pointed at Chaos. You? Chaos frowned. What about me? Carl tilted his head. You ever notice how people treat you like you're the center of the story? Chaos shrugged. I have a certain presence, Youngblood muttered. That... Carl smiled. Exactly. Your whole life is like some kind of bizarre riddle. Chaos stepped closer.
Carl.
Let her go. Carl shook his head again.
No.
Chaos sighed.
All right.
Gumbo moved suddenly. Fast. Carl reached for the knife. Chaos tackled him. The chair tipped. The candle fell. For a moment there was pure mayhem. Then silence. Carl lay still. Clotilde stared in shock. Chaos slowly stood up. Carl wasn't breathing. Janet checked his pulse. She shook her head quietly. He's gone. The strange hint. As Chaos untied Clotilde, something fell from Carl's pocket. A folded, handwritten note. Chaos opened it. Inside was strange symbols, coordinates, and a single sentence. Chaos frowned. Outside, a lone blackbird sat on the convent roof, watching, very carefully, elsewhere. Far away on the Gulf Coast near Galveston, Texas, a man sat on a pontoon boat watching the ocean. He received a message on his phone. 3 words. Carl is dead. The man smiled slowly.
Well, he said.
That complicates things. Behind him on the deck sat a strange device humming quietly. Something very advanced. Something that looked suspiciously like a time machine. Chapter 18. The trees are thinking. The power went out at 2:11 a.m. in the morning. No warning. No flicker. Just gone. The convent fell into darkness so complete that even the old green carpeted stairs seemed to vanish into nothing. Outside, the hairy trees swayed slowly in the wind like giant animals considering a difficult decision. Chaos sat at the dining table staring at Carl's handwritten note, the one that said, "Watch the black bird." The words bothered him in the same way an unfinished melody bothers a musician. Something unresolved. Something just barely out of reach. Janet sat across from him, examining the strange symbols with a flashlight. "These markings," she muttered. "They look like runes." Youngblood leaned over her shoulder. "Runes?" Janet nodded. "Or instructions. The power outage. The darkness wasn't just at the convent. The entire town had gone dark. Streetlights, traffic lights, every glowing sign. Dead. In the distance, someone yelled, "Give me a break." Chaos rubbed his eyes. "All right," he said. "That's officially concerning." Anai, the magical horse, stamped her hoof nervously. "The trees are changing." Everyone turned toward the windows. Outside, the forest of hairy trunks had begun to move, not swaying, rearranging, like a gigantic puzzle being slowly solved. The museum warning. At the small local museum downtown, the night guard was finishing a late snack of cold leftovers when he heard hooves outside the door. He opened it cautiously. Standing there in the moonlight was the enormous moose statue from the museum courtyard. Except now. It was breathing. The guard blinked.
Well,
that's new. The moose leaned its massive head toward him and spoke quietly. "You must warn them." The guard dropped his sandwich. "Warn who?" "The ones studying the machine. The forest is waking." The guard stared. "Am I hallucinating?" The moose sighed. "Look, I don't have time for existential debates. Just go." Back at the convent, Clotilde sat wrapped in a blanket after the Carl incident. The room still smelled faintly of burnt rope and candle wax. Dorothea handed her a cup of tea. "You're safe now." Clotilde nodded quietly.
I know.
Chaos looked up.
You okay?
Clotilde gave a tired smile.
I've had worse Tuesdays.
Then something strange happened. Her hand moved suddenly across the table. She grabbed a pen and began writing. Fast. Very fast. Chaos frowned. "Clotilde?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were unfocused. The pen scratched across the paper in jagged loops. Janet leaned closer. "That's automatic writing." Youngblood blinked. "Like spiritualist seances?" Janet nodded. Clotilde's hand stopped. Chaos picked up the page. The signature at the bottom made his stomach drop. Carl. "The message." Chaos read the message slowly. "The machine is not the key. The trees are. Watch the black bird. IT has already landed." Youngblood exhaled slowly. "Well, that's unsettling." Clotilde blinked and looked down at the page. "What did I write?" Chaos handed her the note. She stared. Elsewhere. Far away near the coast, The mysterious man on the pontoon boat adjusted the controls on the strange humming machine beside him. The device glowed softly. Panels covered in bizarre carvings and strange symbols lit up one by one. The man stretched lazily in the boat's luxurious hot leather seats. "All right," he muttered. Time for phase 2. The machine hummed louder. The think tank. In a secure government think tank somewhere in Germany, analysts stared at satellite images of the town. One scientist pointed to the screen. "The trees. They're forming a pattern." Another analyst whispered, "Is that a spiral?" A third scientist shook his head slowly. "No. It's a target." The bathroom incident. Back at the convent, chaos was unfolding when Gumbo suddenly froze. His eyes widened. Chaos turned. "You okay?" Gumbo looked embarrassed. Something weird just happened." Chaos frowned. "What kind of weird?" Gumbo shifted awkwardly. "Well, my bladder apparently decided tonight was the night it quits its job." Youngblood blinked. "You peed yourself?" Gumbo shrugged helplessly. "I didn't even feel it coming." Then he laughed.
Well,
"At least this is the first apocalypse where I get to experience it pants first." Chaos stared at him. "You're taking that remarkably well." Gumbo shrugged. Fight or flight response. Apparently my body chose sprinkle. Even Clotilde laughed. For a moment the tension cracked. The return to sender. Janet studied Carl's symbols again. "These coordinates," she pointed. "They match the safety deposit box number Carl had written earlier." Chaos frowned. "At the bank?" Janet nodded. Carl was leaving breadcrumbs. Youngblood leaned back. So he knew something was coming. Chaos sighed. That man tortured people and hid clues like a Trivial Pursuit champion. The trees. Outside. The forest shifted again. Branches twisted together. Roots pushed through the soil. The hairy trunks leaned inward like thousands of enormous listeners gathering around a whispered secret. And I shivered. "They're about to do something." Chaos stepped outside. The air smelled strange, like decay mixed with rain. In the distance, the old fairgrounds machine flickered with light. Then, the trees all turned at once, facing the same direction, facing the sky. Chaos whispered.
oh no.
Above the town, something moved silently through the clouds. Not an airplane, not a satellite. Something that had just finished a crash landing somewhere deep in the forest. The blackbird had arrived. Meanwhile, inside the convent, a jukebox in the abandoned recreation room suddenly turned on by itself. A crackling record began to play. A haunting requiem melody drifted through the building. Clotilde stared at the paper again. Carl wrote this after he died. Chaos nodded slowly. Which means one thing. Youngblood sighed.
I hate where this is going.
Chaos looked toward the forest. "We're not dealing with aliens." Janet swallowed. "What are we dealing with?" Chaos exhaled. "Something older. Outside." The trees leaned further toward the sky, like witnesses preparing for something enormous. And far away in the forest, something massive moved. Chapter 19. The trees decide. Morning arrived reluctantly. The sky over the town had that strange gray color that happens when weather can't decide whether it's going to storm or simply collapse in exhaustion. Chaos stood on the convent porch, watching the forest. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then he rubbed them and looked again. The trees were styling their hair. For weeks, the strange hair that had sprouted from their bark had grown long, straight, and silky, falling down the trunks like endless dark brown hair. Now something had changed. Some strands were curling. Others were crimping. A few particularly ambitious branches were attempting complicated French braids, weaving their own strands together with slow, patient movements.
Chaos blinked. Well, he said, that's unsettling.
Behind him, Janet, the slime troll, peered through binoculars. They're adapting. Anne stamped her hooves uneasily.
No,
The magical horse said quietly. They're preparing. The quiet frenzy. In the kitchen, Tiana stood at the window gripping the counter. Her breathing had become quick and shallow. She watched the forest with growing concentration. They're communicating, she whispered. Dorothea looked up from the table. With hair? Tiana nodded slowly. Patterns. Braids. Curls. They're encoding messages.
Chaos turned.
That's either incredibly impressive or incredibly terrifying.
Both, Janet said.
The car in the field. At the edge of town, a rusted 1995 Altima sat abandoned near the fairgrounds. The driver's door hung open. Inside, the car radio played faint static. A lone pair of sideburns lay on the passenger seat. No one wanted to discuss that detail. Carl's final clue. Youngblood and Cora had gone to the bank to retrieve Carl's mysterious safety deposit box. The bank itself smelled faintly of dust and old carpet cleaner. Inside the box they found only 3 objects: a beaded satchel, a photograph, and a rusty robot toy from the 1950s. Youngblood frowned.
That's it?
Cora opened the satchel. Inside was a folded map. Marked locations circled in thick razor-sharp ink. The points formed a strange shape. Youngblood leaned closer. That looks like... Cora finished the sentence quietly. A brain. The disturbing thing. Meanwhile, behind the convent barn, something unpleasant was happening. A tweaker named Randall had been sneaking around the property for weeks, looking for things to steal. He had heard rumors of equipment inside the fairgrounds machine. Copper wiring, metal parts, things worth money. He slipped into the barn and began rummaging through old crates. Then he noticed something odd. A small hole in the wall behind a stack of tools. Randall squinted.
Hello?
He pushed his hand through the hole. Something on the other side grabbed him. Hard. Randall screamed. His arm jerked violently as something unseen battered the wall from the other side. Clattering sounds. Scratching. Grunting. Randall yanked his arm free and stumbled backward. His wobbly legs nearly collapsed under him. He ran screaming into the field. No one saw what was behind the wall, but the hole slowly sealed itself. The bizarre thing. Back at the convent courtyard, something equally strange was unfolding. Anai suddenly lifted her head. In the field beyond the fence, a pack of horses appeared. Dozens of them.
See.
Watching. Their bodies perfectly still except for the occasional slow stomp of hooves. Anai stepped forward cautiously. One of the horses stepped out of the group. It bowed its head slightly. Anai listened, then turned back to Chaos. They say the forest is angry. Chaos crossed his arms. Why? Anai hesitated. Because someone tried to sabotage the system. Chaos blinked. You mean Carl? Anai shook her head slowly. No. Someone older. The macabre thing. Later that afternoon, the town gathered at the cemetery for Carl's funeral. The sky had turned the color of old pewter. A crude funeral pyre had been arranged because the local morgue was overwhelmed and the coroner's findings had raised too many strange questions. Chaos stood near the back with Gumbo. The priest droned quietly about forgiveness, mercy, and the possibility of grace, even for those who lost their minds. A gust of wind swept across the graveyard. The trees beyond the fence shifted again. Curling, braiding, weaving patterns faster now. Suddenly the coffin lid creaked. The crowd froze. The wood cracked open slightly. A thin black amoeba-like substance oozed out and slid across the grass. Someone screamed.
Chaos whispered. That's not normal.
The substance slithered toward the trees. The trees leaned down and absorbed it. Total silence followed. The priest dropped his Bible.
Dear God.
The barn discovery. That evening Chaos returned to the barn. The strange hole in the wall had reopened slightly. Inside, something metallic moved, clattering softly. Chaos crouched low on his knees and elbows to look inside. What he saw made his stomach tighten. Buried in the dirt behind the barn was an enormous machine.
Aussie.
Rusting, covered in bizarre carvings.
Chaos whispered. Oh.
Carl had been right about one thing. This town was a laboratory. Meanwhile, in the forest, deep in the woods, the object that had crash-landed the night before slowly opened. Steam rose from the metal hull. A figure stepped out, tall, elegant, with hair braided into perfect spirals. The figure looked toward the town, toward the styling trees, and smiled. "Darling," the stranger whispered softly, "what a fascinating little world you have here." The trees responded by braiding themselves even faster. The message they were sending now was unmistakable. Danger. And somewhere beneath the fairgrounds machine, something else began waking up. Chapter 20. The Tree at the Edge of the World. End of Part 1. The abandoned silo stood at the end of a deserted road where the pavement gave up and turned to dirt that smelled faintly of sugarcane, rainwater, and neglect. Beside it rose the largest tree anyone had ever seen. Not tall.
Wide.
So wide its trunk looked like a bricklayer had spent centuries stacking bark in widening rings. The strange hair that had once grown from the trees now hung from this one like enormous ribbons, some braided in careful zigzag patterns, others curling into elaborate knots that looked suspiciously deliberate. The air buzzed with mosquitoes and drifting fireflies. Chaos stood at the edge of the clearing with the others. Cora, Gumbo, Dorothea, Youngblood, Clotilde, Diana, Anai the magical horse, and Janet the slime troll standing slightly forward like a stubborn green bodyguard. The tree groaned softly. Something was inside it, the man behind it all. A slow clap echoed through the clearing. A man stepped out from behind the trunk, tall, gray-haired, wearing an expensive coat with elbow patches like a professor who had wandered too far from campus.
Professor Brigsby.
Or as Carl had written in one of his notes,
Brisby.
The professor smiled warmly. "Well," he said, "everyone finally made it." Chaos crossed his arms. "You've been busy." Brigsby gestured toward the massive tree.
Beautiful, isn't it?
The bark pulsed faintly. The braided hair moved slowly like living rope.
What is it?
Cora asked. Brigsby's smile widened. "Salvation." Janet snorted. "That's a delusion." Brigsby laughed.
Oh, no.
"This is evolution. The truth." Brigsby began pacing slowly in front of the tree like a lecturer addressing a prep school auditorium. Humanity is fragile.
Chaotic.
Prone to violence, greed, and stupidity. He gestured toward the sky. The nanites were meant to protect the earth, but they needed direction. Youngblood frowned. "So you sabotaged the system." Brigsby shrugged. "I improved it." He pointed to the tree. "The forest now processes human behavior. It observes. It judges."
It corrects.
Chaos sighed. "You built a giant judgmental haircut machine." Brigsby ignored him. "The trees are the interface. They interpret thoughts. They convert human impulses into signals. And those signals," he tapped the trunk, "control everything." Janet's charge. Janet stepped forward. "You're playing God." Brigsby smiled calmly. No, I'm resurrecting the world. Janet lunged. Her slime-coated body slammed into the professor like a bowling ball covered in determination. Brigsby staggered backward. For a moment, chaos erupted. Branches lashed down. Roots burst through the ground. Janet grabbed Brigsby's coat and hurled him against the trunk. The professor pulled something from his pocket. A small metallic device. He pressed a button. The tree exploded with movement. A branch whipped down and struck Janet violently across the chest. She flew backward into the dirt. Hard. Chaos ran to her.
Janet! She wasn't moving.
Green slime oozed slowly from a deep wound. Clothill dropped to her knees. We need wound care now. Anne stepped forward slowly, her eyes glowing faintly. The horse's gift. The magical horse lowered her head toward Janet. Her mane shimmered like threads of moonlight. This will hurt, Anne whispered. She pressed her forehead against Janet's chest. A faint golden light spread across the slime troll's body. Tree sap nearby began to glow and lift into the air. The sap wrapped around Janet's wound like living bandages. Chaos watched in stunned silence. Janet coughed suddenly.
Chaos exhaled.
Oh, thank God. Janet groaned. Next time I tackle a mad scientist, someone remind me to stretch first. The standoff. Brigsby stood again, brushing dirt from his coat. Touching moment. He lifted the device again. You see, Chaos, this machine needs a life raft, a mind strong enough to guide it. His eyes locked onto Chaos. And you are perfect. Chaos groaned. Everyone keeps saying that. Brigsby pointed the device. Branches snapped downward. One wrapped around Chaos's waist and lifted him into the air. He dangled several feet above the ground.
Let him go,
Cora shouted. Brigsby ignored her. You have extraordinary cognitive patterns. Your mind could guide the forest. Chaos swung slightly in the air.
You know...
This is a terrible sales pitch. Clotilde, stand. Clotilde stepped forward slowly. You're insane. Brigsby smiled.
That's been said.
Clotilde raised a hand.
You call this salvation?
But it's just control. The professor tilted his head. You sound like someone on the witness stand. Clotilde didn't move. You turned a whole town into an experiment. A heist disguised as science. Brigsby laughed softly. Call it what you like. The system is already awake. The tree awakens. The massive tree shuddered. Hair braids tightened. Roots burst through the soil. A low sound echoed through the clearing, like the grinding gears of dinosaurs waking up beneath the earth. Chaos looked down at the others. This is getting bad. Gumbo nodded. Extremely bad. Anai's whisper. Anai stepped closer to the tree. She listened. The branches trembled. The wind stopped. Total silence. Then she spoke quietly. The forest is confused. Chaos blinked.
About what?
The difference between Shmen and AY men. Everyone stared. Anne shrugged. Pronunciation matters in ancient languages. The final moment. Brigsby raised his device again. Enough delays. Time to seal the chamber. The tree roared. Branches lunged. Chaos swung higher into the air. Cora reached for a fallen pickaxe. Janet struggled to stand. The entire forest leaned toward the clearing. Even the fireflies froze mid-flight. Brigsby smiled calmly. Witness the birth of a new world. Chaos looked down at the group.
Well?
This seems like a good place for a miracle. The tree began to split open. Inside, something enormous moved. Something older than the forest. Something watching. The wind picked up. Leaves spun in violent circles. And just before the clearing exploded into motion, a voice whispered through the trees. Do not surrender. The chapter ends here. The forest waits. The machine hums. And the fate of the town hangs suspended like chaos himself, dangling between disaster and whatever comes next. End of Part 1.
Part 2, Chapter 21. Clotilde and the Sanatorium of Questionable Recovery. Clotilde woke to the sound of mechanical wheezing. Not dramatic wheezing, not poetic wheezing. The kind of wheezing that suggested a piece of medical equipment was doing something deeply unromantic nearby. She opened one eye. A man in the next bed lay sleeping with a CPAP machine, strapped to his face like a plastic squid, attempting to resuscitate him. The machine made a wet, huffing sound. Wheeze, puff, wheeze. Clotilde blinked. The ceiling above her was decorated with peeling zebra print wallpaper that someone in the 1970s had clearly believed would calm people experiencing psychological collapse. It had not. She sat up slowly. Her wrists still carried faint rope burns, pale pink rings from a time she did not entirely remember, but very much wished she didn't. Ah, she said to no one. Another glorious morning in the nut house. Technically, it was called a sanatorium, but everyone knew what that meant. A polite word for people who had seen something the rest of the world refused to believe. Outside the window, the city light skyline glowed in the distance. Not her town. Somewhere larger, more normal. The kind of place where trees didn't braid their own hair, and slime trolls didn't tackle professors with god complexes. She swung her legs out of bed. Her hospital robe smelled faintly of bleach, damp towels, and existential regret. A nurse appeared in the doorway holding a clipboard. Good morning, Miss Clotilde. Clotilde squinted at the badge. Dr. Banker. She raised an eyebrow. That's an unfortunate name for a psychiatrist. The doctor sighed. I'm a psychiatrist, not a banker. Clotilde shrugged. Could have fooled me. 6 months earlier. The memory came back slowly. Not like a lightning bolt. More like a drunken kaleidoscope. Fragments. Chaos hanging from the tree. Professor Brigsby ranting like a TED talk speaker possessed by the wicked witch of bad ideas. The forest roaring. And then, the thing inside the tree. She rubbed her temples. Lord, that thing. Breakfast at the asylum. The cafeteria looked like a French brothel had married a DMV waiting room. Imported carpets that had clearly seen some things. A grease-smelling grease trap odor drifting from the kitchen. A man dressed like a bodybuilder, wearing only zebra-striped pants, was arguing with a nurse about the philosophical implications of pterodactyls. Clotilde sat down with a tray of food that vaguely resembled carrots and possibly fruit pies. A woman with a platinum wig leaned across the table. You knew? Clotilde nodded, relatively. The woman whispered conspiratorially. I used to run a passion play in Branson. Clotilde nodded politely. I once watched a tree eat a scientist. The woman paused. Fair. The truth slowly returns. Dr. Banker sat across from her with a notebook. We'd like to talk about the night of the incident. Clotilde smiled thinly. Which incident? He tapped his pen. The one involving the tree. She sighed. Well, it all started with a man named Professor Brigsby. What actually happened? The memories began lining up like crooked dominoes. Brigsby had activated the machine. The tree had split open. Inside, something ancient had stirred. No alien. Not a god. A mothership of biological intelligence, buried beneath the soil for centuries. A living system older than the town itself. The nanites had been feeding it information for decades. Human behavior, fear, violence, compassion. The forest wasn't judging humanity. It was learning. Brigsby wanted to control it. Chaos had refused. The machine overloaded. The forest revolted. Janet tackled Brigsby again. Anne smashed the control panel with her hooves. The mothership sealed itself underground. And the trees. The trees cut their own hair. The signal ended. The new normal. 6 months later, the town had returned to a strange version of ordinary life. The trees still had hair, but now it stayed neatly trimmed. The fairgrounds machine had shut down. The government called it a meteorological anomaly. The locals called it Tuesday. Chaos had become something of a legend, part philosopher, part renegade, part accidental folk hero, with what the town newspaper delicately referred to as an incomparable physical confidence. Clotilde had snorted when she read that. He's hung like a philosophical debate, she had muttered. Why Clotilde was here. Dr. Banker cleared his throat. And you believe all this happened? Clotilde leaned back. Oh, honey. I watched a horse perform resuscitation with tree sap. He scribbled something in his notebook. Clotilde leaned forward. Let me guess. Delusion. Trauma response. Shared psychosis. Dr. Banker smiled gently. We prefer the term altered consciousness event. Clotilde laughed. Well, bless your heart. The real reason. She lowered her voice. You want to know why I'm really here? Dr. Banker looked up. Clotilde leaned closer. Because the town needed someone to blame. Someone to say the whole thing was madness. Someone to declare the war over. He blinked. War? Clotilde tapped the table. Spell it with me. W-A-R. Dr. Banker sighed. You pronounce it war. Clotilde smiled sweetly. In my town, we say worsh. He rubbed his temples. The strange ending. Later that night, Clotilde wandered the hallways, past the seldom-used storage room, past a broken washing machine. Someone insisted on calling a washing machine. She stopped at the window. Outside, in the courtyard, a tree stood alone. Its hair swayed gently, and just for a moment, Clotilde could swear it was forming a braid. She smiled slowly. Well, she whispered, that figures. Behind her, the CPAP machine wheezed again. And somewhere far away, in a quiet orchard outside the town, Chaos stood beside Anne, watching the wind move through the trees, waiting. Because everyone who had survived knew something important. The story wasn't finished, not even close. Part 2. Chapter 22. The Checkout. Clotilde was in the middle of explaining to a bored orderly why red beans should never be served next to hospital fruit pies when the front doors of the sanatorium flew open like a theatrical entrance in a low-budget opera. Dorothea marched in, not walked, marched. The kind of march that suggests a woman has already decided how the next 2 hours of reality are going to unfold. She wore a long coat and carried a purse that looked heavy enough to conceal both scripture and a cigar box full of secrets. Clotilde looked up from her tray. Well, either I'm being released or someone's here to finally commit me properly. Dorothea set a stack of paperwork on the desk. I'm checking you out. The receptionist blinked. But she's scheduled for observation. Dorothea slid a form across the counter. Now she's scheduled for leaving. The woman read it. The signature at the bottom carried a government seal and a name, Professor Voss. The receptionist swallowed. Oh. Well, that's official then. Clotilde stood slowly. Well, look at that. Freedom. She glanced around the cafeteria. The bodybuilder in zebra pants waved sadly. Tell the outside world about the pterodactyls, he said. Clotilde saluted him. I will do my best. The ride back. The vehicle waiting outside was a large black SUV with a suspension system that rode smoother than a politician's apology. Chaos leaned against the hood, drinking coffee. He grinned when he saw Clotilde. Welcome back to the land of the allegedly sane. Clotilde squinted at him. You look tired. Chaos shrugged. Running a town full of psychic trees is exhausting. Behind him, Anne, the magical horse, snorted impatiently. Janet, the slime troll, sat in the back seat, eating something from a bag labeled shish kebabs. Baby Germain sat in Cora's lap, chewing thoughtfully on what appeared to be a mother-of-pearl bracelet. Clotilde blinked. Well, that's a lot of people. Dorothea sighed. We needed everyone. Clotilde climbed into the seat. So what's the emergency? Gumbo turned around from the passenger seat. His face looked pale. I'm having visions again? Clotilde groaned. Oh, no. Not visions. Those always end badly. The return of the messages. Dorothea leaned closer. They started 3 nights ago. Messages in the mirror. Clotilde froze. From conception? Dorothea nodded. Same handwriting. Same voice. Clotilde rubbed her temples. I knew that woman wasn't finished haunting us, Chaos added quietly. And the hair trees are reacting again. Clotilde looked out the window. They were passing farmland now. The fields stretched wide beneath the afternoon sun. In the distance, a cluster of trees swayed. Their hair moved in slow, deliberate patterns, almost like signals. Clotilde sighed. Of course they are. The secret room again. Back in town, the convent looked the same as ever. Old stone, crooked gutters, and a suspiciously cheerful historical marker that read, Site of the 1894 Passion Play incident. No one talked about that incident anymore. Inside the building, the familiar smell returned. Incense, old paper, and faint bed bug paranoia. Chaos pushed open the door to the hidden hallway. Behind the bookshelf, through the narrow passage, into the secret room. The mirror stood exactly where it always had, cracked slightly down one side. Janet wiped dust off the glass. Well, moment of truth. The mirror flickered, then slowly. Words appeared, written in condensation. The forest is not finished. Clotilde sighed. Wonderful. Gumbo's vision. Gumbo leaned against the wall. His eyes went distant. You're not going to like this part. Chaos rubbed his face. I already don't. Gumbo spoke slowly. I saw the clearing again. The big tree. The abandoned silo. Clotilde frowned. That place is sealed. Gumbo nodded. Not anymore. Silence fell. The surprise guests. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 young voices burst into the room. Aunt Clotilde. Clotilde turned. Standing in the doorway were Merrick and Loon, her niece and nephew. Alive. Intact. Not divided into strange alternate versions, like the bizarre temporal accident had once threatened. Clotilde blinked. How? Professor Voss stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. It took a combination of nanite recalibration and temporal stabilization. Chaos translated. We fixed it. Clotilde stared at the kids. Well, that's the best news I've heard all year. Merrick grinned. We're back. Loon added proudly. And we didn't even have to stay dead. The warning. The mirror fogged again. New words formed slowly. The roots are moving. Janet frowned. Roots? Outside the convent, the wind picked up suddenly. The trees rustled. Not violently. Purposefully. Clotilde walked to the window. The nearest tree bent slightly. Its hair parted, revealing something beneath the bark. A pattern. A symbol. Chaos whispered. That wasn't there yesterday. Professor Voss adjusted his glasses. The forest is evolving. Gumbo shivered. My visions didn't end with the tree. Clotilde turned. What comes next? Gumbo swallowed. The face plants. Everyone froze. Janet blinked. I'm sorry. The what? Gumbo exhaled slowly. Plants that grow faces. Clotilde sighed deeply. Well, back to work. Outside. The trees began braiding their hair again. And far beneath the soil, something turned over in its sleep.
Chapter 23. The instructions in the secret room. Night had settled over the convent, like an old quilt patched together with moonlight, cricket noise, and the faint smell of fried onions drifting from somewhere in town, where somebody had clearly decided it was time for finger foods and a backyard rodeo. Inside the convent, however, things were less festive. Clotilde, Dorothea, and Gumbo stood again inside the secret room. The mirror had gone dark. The air smelled faintly of incense and old dust, and the kind of seriousness that tends to show up when supernatural forces decide they have a memo to deliver. Chaos leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching. Youngblood stood nearby nervously, adjusting his jacket. He was 26, worked under Clotilde at the call center, and treated her with the loyal intensity of a golden retriever that had read too many philosophy books. He whispered to Chaos, "Do you think this is another poltergeist situation?" Chaos shrugged. "In this town? Every Tuesday. The orchard." Outside the window, the moon lit the apple and orange orchard behind the convent. The place had once been called the Sisters of the Golden Orchard because the trees produced fruit so sweet people swore it could cure heartbreak. Now the trees had hair, which complicated the marketing. One of the hair trees bent slightly toward the window, almost listening. Gumbo rubbed his temples. "I can hear something again." Clotilde sighed. "Please tell me it's not another prophecy." Gumbo nodded slowly. "Worse. It's instructions. The mirror speaks. The mirror fogged. Letters began forming again. Slowly. Deliberately. Two must go." Clotilde leaned closer. "Go where?" More words appeared. "Find the mandrake root." Dorothea frowned. "Mandrake?" Professor Voss stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mandrake root appears in several old European magical traditions. Supposedly it grows where powerful forces intersect." Janet scratched her chin. "Like ley lines?" "Exactly." Clotilde folded her arms. "Well, isn't that just adorable?" More writing appeared. "Beneath the northern lights." Chaos blinked. "That's not local." The mirror continued. "Only the root can quiet the forest." Everyone looked at each other. Gumbo exhaled. "The trees are waking something again." "The problem?" Clotilde began pacing.
Well, that's just great.
"A magical route under the northern lights, somewhere near the equator, which makes absolutely no geographical sense." Professor Voss raised a finger. "Magical geography often ignores." Clotilde waved him off. "Yes, yes." "Reality is optional. Choosing the two." Dorothea looked around the room. "The mirror says 2 people must go." Chaos stretched. "Well, I'm a jack of all trades." Janet raised a hand. "I once arm-wrestled a swamp monster." Youngblood cleared his throat. "I own an igloo cooler and a very reliable motor scooter." Clotilde rubbed her temples. "This is starting to feel like a crapshoot." The mirror flickered again. New words appeared. "The wise." "And the treacherous." Everyone turned slowly toward Chaos. He grinned. "Well, that narrows it down." Dorothea folded her arms. "You're going." Chaos nodded. "Fair." Clotilde looked around. "Now who's treacherous?" Youngblood coughed. "I once stole a stapler from work." Clotilde shook her head. "That's petty crime." Janet leaned forward. "I did eat 3 of Dorothea's French fries yesterday." Dorothea glared. "That's gluttony." Then everyone slowly looked at Gumbo. Gumbo blinked. "Oh, come on." Clotilde sighed. "Sorry." "You're mysterious." "That counts." Gumbo's vision. Gumbo closed his eyes. A sudden wave passed over him. Images flooded in. A poppy field. A frozen lake glowing under green lights. A cave shaped like an enormous mouth. And inside, a black root twisted like a snake. He gasped. "I saw it." Clotilde leaned forward. "Where?" Gumbo whispered. "Somewhere north." "Very north." "The town outside." From outside came the distant sound of Cajun music. Someone was having a late tailgate party in a truck bed near the rodeo grounds. A boombox blasted Motown. Someone shouted do-si-do like they were running a square dance.
A break dancer spun on the asphalt. Life went on.
Even when reality was cracking open. Youngblood's concern. Youngblood stepped closer to Clotilde. "You're not going to let them go alone, are you?" Clotilde shook her head.
No.
"They'll have backup." He looked relieved. "Good." She handed him a notebook. "You're in charge while we're gone." His face turned pale. "That sounds like a political debate waiting to happen." Clotilde nodded.
Exactly.
The mirror's final warning. The mirror fogged one last time. "Hurry. The roots are listening." Outside, the orchard trees rustled. Their hair twisted slowly in the wind. Somewhere deep underground, something enormous shifted again. Clotilde sighed. "Where?" "Looks like we're going on a road trip." Chaos clapped Gumbo on the back. "Pack your menthols." Gumbo frowned. "I don't smoke." Chaos grinned. "You might start." Part 2, Chapter 24. 3 incidents. The town woke the next morning under a sky the color of watered-down ink. Rain threatened, but refused to commit. The air smelled like damp leaves and rainwater trapped in the gutters of old buildings. When a town has survived psychic trees, haunted mirrors, a slime troll, and one extremely unpleasant professor, people start believing the weirdness might finally take a break. Reality, as usual, had other plans. 3 things happened before lunch. None of them made sense. The blind school. The first strange event took place at the St. Barnaby School for the Blind, a quiet brick building that usually smelled like chalk dust, old books, and cafeteria tater tots. Inside the music room, a class of children sat around a piano. Their teacher, Miss Havison, wore a short patterned shirt pattern blouse that looked like it had been sewn from a cheerful disaster of fabric scraps. She clapped her hands. "All right, everyone. Today we're practicing rhythm. Let's try the hokey pokey again." The children giggled. Someone started tapping a desk. Another child hummed. Then something happened. Every student froze. At the exact same moment, their heads tilted slightly toward the window. Miss Haverson noticed immediately. "Children." One boy spoke softly. "Something is shining." Miss Haverson frowned. "But you can't." The windows began glowing. Soft light poured through the glass. Green. Blue. Silver. Like a miniature version of the northern lights dancing over the classroom. The children began describing it.
Not guessing.
Not imagining. Describing. A mountain range of light. Like sapphires. Like a mirror ball spinning. Miss Haverson backed slowly toward the door. Because the children in that room had never been able to see, and yet they were now calmly narrating colors that rolled across the sky like a cosmic hologram. One girl whispered something that made the teacher's stomach drop.
"They're calling us."
The malt shop. Across town, the malt shop was normally the safest place in existence. Milkshakes. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Teenagers arguing about music and preteen zits. The kind of harmless chaos that smells like ketchup and nostalgia. This morning a small crowd sat inside. Someone had just ordered a pina colada milkshake that no one was brave enough to taste. A group of teenagers were sharing wasabi peas, like it was a dare. The jukebox was playing Motown. And then the doors slammed shut. Hard. Every door. Front entrance. Back kitchen. Storage room. All locked. A metallic click echoed. A padlock appeared on the inside handles. No one had touched them. The cook blinked. Well, that's new. Someone tried the door. Nothing. Another person checked their phone. No signal. A woman whispered, "Are we sealed in?" Then the lights flickered. A shape appeared in the center of the diner. Not solid. Not ghostly either. More like a projection. A floating outline of a human figure made of shifting light. A hologram. It spoke in a calm, mechanical voice. "This building is temporarily sealed for observation." A teenager raised his hand. "Is this a prank?" The hologram turned. "Negative," someone whispered. "This feels like a casino heist movie." Another person muttered. "Or a crash test dummy experiment." The hologram continued. "Please remain calm." No one remained calm. Someone threw an orange peel at it. The peel passed straight through. The hologram didn't react. Observation protocol continues. Outside, rain finally began falling. Hard. The convent. Back at the convent, things were worse. Clotilde stood in the secret room with Dorothea and Gumbo. They had just finished discussing the Mandrake mission when the mirror began vibrating. Not glowing. Not writing. Vibrating. The entire wall hummed like a tuning fork. Gumbo pressed his hand to the glass. "It's not sending messages." Clotilde frowned. "Then what is it doing?" The mirror cracked. Not breaking. Opening. A thin vertical line appeared in the center. Light poured out. Blinding. Inside the light something moved. Not a reflection. Not a spirit. Something deeper. Like the mirror had become a window into an entirely different landscape. They saw water. Endless water. The Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. Waves. Storm clouds. Lightning. Then something rose from the ocean. A structure. A sea. Stone towers. A city half submerged beneath the waves. Dorothea whispered, "That's impossible." Professor Voss staggered backward. "Unless—" Clotilde glared at him. "Unless what?" Voss swallowed. "The mandrake root might not just quiet the forest. What if it seals something much bigger?" The image shifted again. The ocean darkened. Something enormous moved beneath the water, too large to understand. Then the mirror snapped shut. The room fell silent. Clotilde stared at the glass. "Well, that's comforting," Gumbo whispered. "I don't think the trees are the problem anymore." Outside, the orchard trees began swaying violently in the rainstorm, their long hair twisted together. Braiding. Unbraiding. Like they were arguing. And far away, at the blind school, the children kept describing lights in the sky. Lights that shouldn't exist. Lights that were moving closer. Part 2. Chapter 25. The Two Who Go. Morning in town arrived like a hungover magician smoke in the air. Tricks half finished. Rabbits still confused. 3 crises now simmered simultaneously. The blind school children describing lights that should not exist. The malt shop sealed shut with its polite but unnerving holographic jailer. and the mirror at the convent showing a drowned city somewhere out in the vast, impossible sweep of the Pacific Ocean. Clotilde stood at the long oak table in the convent dining room, holding a mug of coffee like it owed her money. Everyone else circled the table. Chaos.
Gumbo.
Dorothea. Janet, the slime troll.
Professor Voss.
Youngblood.
Cora.
Sean. And I, the magical horse, stood in the doorway, chewing thoughtfully on a broom handle like it was celery. Clotilde sighed.
Well.
The universe has requested 2 volunteers for a suicidal errand. Chaos raised a hand. Technically, it requested the wise and the treacherous. Gumbo groaned.
That still sounds like me.
The vote. Dorothea leaned forward. The mandrake route is near the North Pole, according to the mirror's coordinates. Youngblood blinked.
That's far.
Professor Voss nodded. Possibly beyond ordinary geography. Magical locations sometimes exist in pockets of reality, a sort of metaphysical black hole where myth and physics overlap. Janet scratched her head. That sounds like quicksand for scientists. Accurate. Chaos stood.
Well,
I'm going. No one argued. He had already become the town's unofficial wingman in supernatural disasters. Clotilde looked around the table. Now we choose the treacherous one. Silence. Then Sean spoke. I vote Gumbo. Gumbo glared. That feels like a raw deal. Dorothea shrugged. You're the only one already receiving messages from the trees. Chaos clapped him on the back. Congratulations. You're the treacherous one. Gumbo groaned. Wonderful. Exactly the reputation I wanted. Clotilde nodded. Decision made. Chaos and Gumbo go north. The mandrake problem. Professor Voss wrote out a map across the table. The parchment looked old enough to have survived several wars and at least one Taliban misunderstanding. Lines zigzagged across it like the frantic scribbles of a delirious cartographer. According to legend, Voss said, mandrake roots grow where powerful energies intersect. Chaos studied the map. Why does it pass through a marshland, a refinery, and something labeled possible merman colony? Voss cleared his throat. The legends vary. Janet grinned.
I hope it's the merman.
The malt shop situation. Youngblood burst into the room holding a tablet. You need to see this. He turned the screen around. The malt shop hologram had escalated. The figure now stood atop a table delivering a speech to the trapped customers. Someone had filmed it during a Zoom call attempt before the signal died. The hologram's voice echoed. This is a controlled observation. One teenager had vomited dramatically into a napkin basket. Another sat on the floor eating Turkish delight and marzipan like the apocalypse required snacks. Clotilde rubbed her face. Why does disaster always involve dairy products? Meanwhile, at the blind school. Across town, the blind students continued describing the sky. One boy whispered, It looks like a bell tower made of light. Another girl said, I see woven shapes. Like madras, woven baskets floating. The teachers exchanged terrified glances. None of the children should be able to see anything. Yet they described details like artists. One girl added quietly, The lights are moving faster now. Preparations. Back at the convent, Chaos and Gumbo packed supplies. Chaos tossed items into a canvas bag. Flashlight. Knife. Compass. A bag of gum wrappers for unknown reasons. Gumbo held up a bottle.
What's this?
Chaos shrugged. Emergency daiquiri mix. Gumbo stared. That's not emergency equipment. Chaos winked. Depends on the emergency. Janet handed them a bundle of herbs. Holistic medicine. Gumbo sniffed them. This smells like a suspicious tea ceremony. Clotilde's warning. Clotilde stood in the doorway watching them. You two listened carefully. Chaos paused. When the universe starts showing drowned cities and psychic trees, that means something ancient is waking up. Gumbo nodded slowly. You think the mandrake root seals it. Clotilde shrugged.
Either that, or it's the key.
Silence fell over the room. The mirror reacts. Suddenly the mirror in the secret room vibrated again. A new message appeared. 45 seconds. Chaos blinked. 45 seconds until what? The entire building shook. A deep mechanical sound rumbled beneath the convent. Water pipes groaned. The floor vibrated like an enormous factory engine starting. Outside, the orchard trees bent violently in the wind, hair whipping like banners. Gumbo whispered, That's new. The mirror flashed. A final message appeared. The door is opening. Chaos looked at Gumbo.
Well,
Looks like we're on the clock. Somewhere beneath the town. Far below the marshland and brick foundations. Something enormous shifted again. Slow. Deliberate. Ainsi. And above it all the sky rippled with strange lights like a cosmic DreamWorks logo gone terribly wrong. The quest had begun.
Part 2. Chapter 26. The door beneath the orchard. The shaking lasted exactly 45 seconds. Then everything stopped. Silence rolled through the convent like a held breath. Clotilde stood frozen in the hallway holding a cup of coffee that had now sloshed halfway down her wrist. Well, she muttered, that can't be good. Chaos and Gumbo were already moving. Outside, the orchard trees thrashed wildly, their long, silky hair whipping through the air like frenzied ribbons. A few strands tangled around a fence post, clothespins someone had left hanging there snapping off one by one. Dorothea stepped onto the porch. Something opened underground. Professor Voss nodded gravely. A chamber, perhaps. Janet squinted toward the orchard. I smell dirt. That's usually a clue. The orchard. They ran across the grass. Rainwater pooled in low spots like shallow mirrors. Marigolds along the path had been crushed flat, and butterflies lifted away lazily as the group approached the orchard. In the center of the grove, something new had appeared. A circular opening in the earth. Stone steps spiraled downward. Old stone. Someone had clearly built this long before the convent ever existed. Clotilde stared at it. Well, that's dramatic. Chaos crouched beside the opening like a detective examining a crime scene. A sleuth with impressive nose hair and questionable decision-making skills. Looks old. Very old. Gumbo leaned over the hole. Smells like treacle. Janet blinked. That's oddly specific. Meanwhile, the malt shop. Across town, the hologram inside the malt shop had escalated from polite observation to something resembling a motivational speaker having a nervous breakdown. Observation continues. The customers were less impressed. A man in a red tank top stood on a chair delivering a full-blown tirade. You can't just lock people in a diner like this. A teenage girl responded by doing a slow victory lap around the counter holding a milkshake. Free refills. Someone else began a game of Red Rover using bar stools. Another person simply ate cauliflower dipped in I can't believe it's not butter like none of this mattered. The hologram seemed confused. The blind school. At the blind school, the children had fallen silent. One little boy whispered. They're closer. His teacher knelt beside him. What is? The lights. The boy smiled dreamily, like pink flowers in the sky. Another child spoke. I see a caravan. Caravan of Stars. The teachers exchanged terrified looks back at the convent. Clodold stared into the underground staircase. All right. Which one of you idiots wants to go first? Chaos grinned. Gumbo. Gumbo sighed. Of course. They descended. The air below smelled damp and ancient. The walls were carved with strange symbols. Not letters. Not pictures. Something older. Professor Voss ran his fingers along the stone. These markings resemble early Choctaw ceremonial glyphs. Janet leaned closer. One of them looks like a werewolf. Voss squinted. That is unsettlingly accurate. The chamber. The staircase opened into a massive underground chamber. The room was enormous, like a cathedral carved out of earth. At its center stood a stone pedestal. On it rested a metal box, a heavy iron cash box, locked with a thick padlock. Chaos whistled. Well, that's ominous. Clodold folded her arms. Anyone got a key? Janet poked the lock. Or a hammer. Suddenly the box rattled. Once. Twice. Everyone froze. Then a voice came from inside. Muffled. Hello? Chaos blinked. That's new. Gumbo leaned closer. Who's in there? The voice replied weakly. I think I've been down here a very long time. Clodold stared at the box. Well, that complicates things. Elsewhere. Far away. North of the town. Beyond marshland and refinery lights. Beyond the highways and empty ranges. Something moved under the surface of the world. Ainsi. Waiting. Part 2. Chapter 27. The children who could see. The rain had stopped. The town looked rinsed and uneasy, like it had just woken from a dream it wasn't sure it wanted to remember. Clodold stood in the underground chamber staring at the rattling cash box when Youngblood burst down the staircase. He nearly tripped over the last step, catching himself on the wall with a desperate log roll that somehow kept him upright. Emergency! Clodold sighed. Of course it is. Youngblood gulped air. The blind school. Gumbo stiffened. What happened? Youngblood wiped sweat from his forehead. The kids are following something? The blind school incident. When the group arrived at the school, the scene looked like a bizarre parade. 20 children walked calmly down the sidewalk in a slow line. No teachers. No supervision. Just children walking in eerie silence toward the edge of town. One little boy held a pitchfork like a ceremonial staff. No one knew where he'd found it. Another child carried a magic marker and had been drawing strange spiral symbols on telephone poles as they passed. Dorothea stepped forward. Children? The kids didn't stop. One girl spoke softly. We're supposed to keep going. Who told you that? Dorothea asked gently. The lights. Another child pointed toward the sky. They're above the theater. Chaos investigates. Chaos jogged ahead of the group. All right, tiny prophets, he said. Where exactly are we going? A boy answered calmly. To the tower. What tower? The old bell tower near the seafood restaurant. Clothild groaned. That building should have been condemned 30 years ago. The distraction. Just then, a city valet worker from the nearby parking lot shouted, Hey, you can't bring farm equipment into town. The boy with the pitchfork blinked. Sorry. Then the entire line of children suddenly stopped. They all turned their heads at the exact same moment, like synchronized swimmers. The air shifted. Something invisible pulsed through the street. Gumbo whispered, Do you feel that? Chaos nodded.
Yeah.
Like a frequency, the accident. Across the street, a battered Range Rover came speeding around the corner. Too fast. Way too fast. Youngblood stepped into the street to wave it down. Hey! Slow. The driver didn't see him. The impact sounded like a dropped piano. Youngblood flew across the pavement. He hit hard. The car screeched to a halt. Chaos ran. Dorothea screamed. Clothild froze. Youngblood lay twisted on the asphalt. Bruises were already spreading across his arms. Blood trickled near his eye. Gumbo knelt beside him. Stay with us. Youngblood coughed weakly. Chaos glanced at the ground. A smashed banana peel sat beside the curb. He stared at it. You're kidding me. The ambulance. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics loaded Youngblood onto a stretcher. Possible head trauma, one said. Cornea injury likely. Internal bleeding. Clotted stomach twisted. Youngblood gave a weak smile. Guess I won't win the decathlon this year. Then they wheeled him into the ambulance. The doors slammed. The siren wailed. Gone. Meanwhile, the children. During the chaos, the children had resumed walking. Chaos noticed first. Hey, they're moving again. The line continued toward the abandoned bell tower, past a rundown seafood restaurant, past a graffiti-covered wall where someone had drawn a city bum sleeping inside a painted trash bin. One girl whispered happily, "We're almost there." Dorothea grabbed Gumbo's arm. "This feels like a ritual." Gumbo nodded. Or an invitation. The tower. The bell tower loomed above them. Old brick. Cracked windows. A structure so fragile it looked like one strong wind might send it collapsing into a sad pile of historical regret. Inside the tower, the children gathered in a circle. One girl knelt beside a section of wall. She tapped the bricks. Once. Twice. A hollow sound echoed. Chaos raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a false wall. The girl pushed. A hidden panel slid open. Behind it, a dark stairway leading downward. Clotilde rubbed her temples. Fantastic. Another hiding place. Because the first underground chamber wasn't enough. Far away, the hospital. Youngblood lay unconscious in a hospital room. Machines beeped softly. A nurse adjusted a drip of Valium. Outside the window, the sky shimmered faintly with distant lights. Inside the room, Youngblood's fingers twitched. Just once. And for a brief moment, his eyes opened. Not confused. Not afraid. But glowing faintly with the same strange light the blind children had described. Then the glow vanished.
Part 2, Chapter 28. The Secret Beneath the Tower. The hidden stairway behind the false wall exhaled a breath of cold air that smelled faintly of cedar wood and something older like a forgotten antique wardrobe sealed up for 100 years. Clotilde stared down the steps with a mixture of fascination and trepidation. "Why," she said, "does every mysterious staircase in this town lead downward into something that wants to ruin my afternoon?" Chaos peered over her shoulder. "Because upward staircases are boring." The blind children had gathered in a quiet semicircle around the opening. They were smiling. Not mischievous smiles, reverent smiles, like parishioners awaiting a miracle. Dorothea whispered to Gumbo, "This feels ceremonial." Gumbo nodded. "Or catastrophic." The descent. They began walking down. The stairway spiraled like the inside of a seashell. Water dripped somewhere far below. The walls were covered with strange carvings, zigzag patterns, spirals, and what looked suspiciously like a Flash Gordon rocket ship. Chaos traced a symbol with his finger. "Is this a language?" Professor Voss squinted. "Possibly a hybrid script. Some of it resembles ritual dictation symbols used in old trance ceremonies." Janet, the slime troll, blinked. "That one looks like someone hiding under a bridge. Symbolism varies. The deeper they went, the colder the air became." Clotilde fanned herself dramatically. "Either we're descending into an ancient temple or a very poorly ventilated cornfield cellar. The chamber of mannequins." The staircase finally opened into a cavernous underground hall. Everyone stopped. The room was filled with mannequins, dozens of them, standing silently in rows. Some wore old clothing, paisley shirts, Victorian dresses. A red tank top someone had mentioned earlier that now seemed eerily familiar. Chaos tilted his head. "Well, that's unsettling," Gumbo whispered. "I feel like we just walked into the world's creepiest department store." One mannequin had an amputated finger. Another held a carved wooden melon. Someone had placed a fruit melon on a pedestal nearby like a ceremonial offering. Clotilde pointed. Please tell me that melon isn't important. Professor Voss shrugged. Hard to say. The heat. Suddenly Janet staggered. Her slime complexion shifted color. Chaos caught her. You all right? Janet wiped her forehead. I think I'm overheating. Dorothea frowned. That's impossible. It's cold down here. Janet swayed. I feel like I'm standing in the middle of Africa. Chaos groaned. Oh, fantastic. She's got heat stroke in an underground cave. They laid Janet down while Gumbo rummaged through a bag. Anyone bring water? Clotilde sprayed Janet's face with a bottle of Febreze by mistake. Janet sputtered. Why does my face smell like lavender furniture? Clotilde shrugged. Protection from mildew. The tent. Across the chamber stood something stranger still. An old canvas tent, right in the center of the room, like a campsite for ghosts. Chaos approached cautiously. This feels like a trap. Clotilde folded her arms. Everything in this town feels like a trap. Chaos pulled the flap open. Inside the tent stood a pedestal. On it sat a brass box, engraved with swirling symbols. Gumbo leaned closer. Is that the secret word container? Voss nodded slowly. In many traditions, powerful knowledge is hidden in plain sight. Chaos read the inscription. The secret word is always visible. Clotilde blinked. That's not helpful. The symbols. The walls began glowing faintly. Lines of text appeared. Words repeating. Petrified, terrified, mystified, horrified, justified, magnified. The words echoed through the chamber like a chant. Dorothea whispered, This is some kind of trance language. Gumbo nodded. Or transfiguration ritual. One of the blind children pointed upward. The word is there. Chaos looked up. The ceiling carving spelled something enormous, hidden in swirling patterns. The word was simple, so obvious it had been missed entirely. Orchard. Clotilde blinked. Well, that tracks. The sudden noise. A loud scraping sound echoed behind them. Everyone turned. One mannequin had moved, just slightly, its head tilted. Janet whispered hoarsely, Nope, I don't like that. Another mannequin shifted, then another. Chaos sighed. Of course. Why wouldn't the mannequins come alive? Clotilde grabbed a metal rod. If one of those things tries strangulation, I'm quitting. Meanwhile, the hospital. Far across town. Youngblood's hospital monitor beeped steadily. A nurse walked past his room. The television above his bed played muted news coverage. A reporter discussed strange lights over the town. The screen showed closed captioning. Unexplained phenomena continue. Youngblood's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked different, focused. His lips moved slightly, as if whispering a secret word. Then the lights in the hospital room flickered and went out. Part 2, Chapter 29. The Boy Who Heard the Signal. Youngblood woke up smiling. Not the kind of smile a man gives after being hit by a car and waking up in a hospital bed. This smile had purpose. The hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. But Youngblood inhaled like he'd just stepped into a cathedral made of cedarwood wardrobes and strange promises. The television above his bed still flickered with muted news coverage. The closed captioning crawled along the bottom of the screen. Strange lights continue over southeast Texas. Youngblood whispered something. Soft, measured. Like someone reading sacred flashcards. Orchard. Pause. Tower. Pause. Door. The lights in the room dimmed again. The nurse. A nurse walked in holding a tray of medication. Good morning. She stopped. Youngblood was sitting upright, which should have been impossible considering the rope burn bruising around his wrists from stretcher restraints and the general fact that he had been unconscious for 12 hours. You shouldn't be sitting up, she said carefully. Youngblood tilted his head. Did you know? He said calmly. There are bone fragments buried under the orchard. The nurse blinked. That's nice, Youngblood continued. There is a winding staircase beneath the bell tower, and the mannequins are waking up. The nurse slowly backed toward the door. Meanwhile, beneath the tower, back in the underground chamber, Chaos poked one of the mannequins with a broom handle he'd found leaning against the wall. Just checking. The mannequin didn't move. Janet sat on the ground, fanning herself with a brochure someone had dropped for a campground in North Carolina. I'm still overheating. You had a heat stroke underground, Chaos said. That's a medical achievement. Clotilde leaned against the wall. Next time we explore ancient ritual caves, I'm bringing a fan. Dorothea examined the pedestal with the brass box again. Whatever this place is, it's not finished with us. Behind them, one mannequin turned its head. Just slightly. Gumbel saw it. He decided not to mention it. The malt shop. Across town, the malt shop customers had finally escaped the hologram situation. Now they stood outside arguing about what had happened. One man waved raffle tickets he'd accidentally stolen during the panic. I'm keeping these. Another customer ate fried catfish out of a takeout container like none of this mattered. Y'all ever been to Pleasure Island in Port Arthur? He asked. Nobody responded. The hospital again. Youngblood was now standing, barefoot, still attached to the fourth. He looked out the window toward the town skyline. The lights above the clouds shimmered faintly, like emeralds embedded in the night. He whispered again, Emeralds. The nurse returned with 2 orderlies. Sir, you need to lie down. Youngblood turned slowly. You should listen to the signals. One orderly whispered. Is he on drugs? The nurse shrugged. Probably. Meanwhile, Chaos experiences an unfortunate moment. Back at the tower entrance, Chaos stood outside staring at the sky. The strange lights flickered again. He rubbed his stomach. Ah-oh. Clotilde glanced at him. What? Chaos stood very still. Very, very still. Oh. Janet looked up. Oh? Chaos sighed. Something happened. Clotilde raised an eyebrow. Define happened. Chaos shrugged helplessly. Let's just say my digestive system has taken a bold stance on this supernatural situation. Janet burst out laughing. Did you just... Yes? Chaos grinned sheepishly, publicly. And there's absolutely nothing I can do about it at the moment. Clotilde stared. You got run out of a torture chamber full of mannequins, and this is what finally breaks you. Chaos shrugged. Honestly, I'm more amused than dismayed. Life's messy. the signal. Inside the chamber, the mannequins began shifting again. Slowly, one arm lifted. Another turned its head. Spiders crawled out of cracks in the walls. Gumbo finally spoke. "They're waking up," Dorothea whispered, because someone activated the word. "Orchard." Chaos groaned. "Fantastic." The vision. Back at the hospital, Youngblood suddenly gasped. Images flooded his mind. The chamber, the mannequins, the brass box. And beneath everything, a second chamber, deeper. A room that looked suspiciously like an old torture chamber carved into granite. A granite countertop slab stood in the center like an altar. Chains hung from the walls. Youngblood whispered, "There's another door." The nurse leaned toward him cautiously. "What door?" Youngblood smiled dreamily. "The one beneath the boat ramp." Elsewhere, outside the hospital, a stray dog chased a hula hoop rolling across the parking lot. The sky above town shimmered again, brighter this time.